Hello, hello. Well, just get it started.
Great beasts once roamed this world, as big as mountains. Yet all that's left of them is bone and amber. We were taught that intelligent life began with the Stone Age and progressed through the Bronze and Iron Ages, civilization getting better and better as the world became more advanced. They say it was called the Stone Age because in the beginning the only resources were rocks. Ancient writings from every culture say differently. The earliest age was not the age of rock and stone, but one that came long before. This was the golden age of paradise, Atlantis, super technology, magic, gods, and titans. But where did it all go? And how did we go from the age of gold to the age of rocks? In this video, I'll tell you exactly where it all went and why it's called the Stone Age. Hey, what's up everyone? Thanks for joining me tonight. I'm Jay Dreamers and I'm going to be presenting this video about the truth on what we call the Stone Age. Why is it referred to as the Stone Age? So let's start right with that. Whenever we go to school and we go through our conditioning and all of our classes and all of our years and years and years of what they call education, a lot of what is taught is implied. It's not really taught directly, but they surround you with imagery and all of these various things in order to allow your mind to soak it in. It's a form of teaching without directly telling you this is the truth, this is real history, this is the way that it is. One of the ways that we've done that is in school we teach about the Stone Age. So a lot of different pictures might come into mind. Pictures about, cavemen and drawing on the cave walls and how about, the creation of the wheel and things like that. I'll be flipping through various pictures as I give this presentation tonight. So bear with me. But yeah, that's what comes to mind. The beginning of life, the beginning of civilization was the Stone Age for us. We go back in time and we are conditioned to think that the further back in time you go, the smaller that mankind became. We all had much hair, basically turning into monkeys the further back in time you go. We all grow shorter and shorter and smaller the further back in time we go. This is what is taught in the school system. So whenever we think about the Stone Age, ultimately we're imagining a bunch of Cro-Magnon cavemen type people who are lugging around clubs and hitting their loved ones over the head and dragging them by the hair, and but it's the Stone Age because the only tools available were rocks, and mankind wasn't really educated or civilized or smart enough, but they would get there eventually. They would attain to smartphones and computers and laptops someday. But that's where the school systems begin. They begin with the age of rock, the age of stone, where mankind only knew about rocks and stones to begin with. So he started making tools with them and whatnot. So this is the origin that we are taught about the Stone Age and ultimately about our origins. That's why I wanted to do this video, to give you an alternative to that. Something else to think about aside from what we are programmed to think about. Now, as a part of this, I will be going over some notes. I'll be referring to some notes as we go. The schools teach, when you go to school, basically they start in Sumeria or Babylon or, anywhere in Mesopotamia or maybe the cradle of Africa, and they always picture man as these unintelligent.
We didn't start in Africa, we started in freaking
just starting off and just learning.
in the middle.
However,
Antarctica.
the world's records,
Not Antarctica, the North Pole.
all cultures that carry with them their ancient teachings passed on in not just myths and legends and stories and lore, which are all have truth to them, okay? Myths and legends and things of that nature would not survive the test of time had they not been based on some extraordinary events that happened in reality, in real life. And they stood the test of time, eventually passed down over and over, the stories told over and over, and they developed a sort of caricature or cartoonish nature to them. That does not mean we should exclude those as being insignificant, untrue, or lies. Actually, they carry with them a lot of truth, a lot of evidence for where we really come from, what the world was really like in our beginnings, and not just our beginnings. This is something that I believe is hidden from us for a purpose, to serve a particular group of people's purpose. Those that basically rule the world today. To keep from us our true origins, what had happened and what was going on, what our realm was like before we arrived on the scene. That's not really talked about. They throw dinosaurs at us and millions of years and this and that, and they allow your imagination to take flight at once they give you a boost in the direction they want you to think about. However, that's not what I'm going to be presenting to you today. Those legends and myths and fairy tales and stories from every single culture across our realm and across time all talk about the ancient Titans, the Titan race, the God race, various words for them. I refer to them as the Elven race, and you can see many of my other videos I've done how I break down how the gods are the Elven race, portrayed in different ways today. But I'm going to be focusing on that antediluvian world, that pre-flood world, if you will, pre-cataclysm, pre-school teaching world of the cavemen and the Stone Age. And how did we get to the Stone Age and the Age of Rocks? Because we do live in the Stone Age. We do live in the Age of Rocks. The schools would teach that we started with the Rock Age or the Stone Age, and then we advanced to, various forms of metal, right? Metallurgy. However, I believe it was the opposite. I believe we began with a golden age where everything was perfect. Technology was amazing. Energy and magic were everywhere. And ultimately, for the most part, people got along. Beings got along. Nature got along with everything much better than it does in our sophisticated, civilized world that we live in today. So, this is the world of myth. This is something that you must now use your imagination balanced with reasoning and breadcrumbs of truth and evidence that we come across. And as more people research our esoteric past and our hidden history of the origins of mankind, and even before our origins, then I believe that more evidence is going to be surfacing in the days that we live in now. So, that being said, the ancient myths and legends all speak about these titans, the god race, right? And this is all going to wrap up into the Stone Age in the next few minutes. It's all going to make sense by the end of this video. The legends and the myths, they talk about these ancient, huge beings, miles tall. We refer to them today as the Titans, and most notably in Greek mythology, like Zeus and Thor and Kronos and things of that nature. Now, the legends, the oldest legends, whether it be in Jainism or Norse mythology or Indian, legends, Hindu, things of that nature, they talk about the oldest Titans that walked our realm. When they died, they literally became the earth itself, or features, geographical features of the earth, like hills and mountains and rivers and things like that, valleys and stuff. Some most notable of those Titans are the goddess Gaia, who represents the earth itself, the Titan Gaia, Ymir, in Norse legend. Ymir basically died and became the earth itself. And of course, we have Atlas as well. Atlas was shown the head of Medusa by Perseus, and Atlas, who held up the world, turned into stone. Legend says giving us our Atlantean mountains, or the mountains of Atlas. So, those are some examples of what I'm going to be talking about, and we're going to get into a lot of different subjects today. So, this is not just myth either. This isn't just stories either. For example, let me just make sure. Okay, yeah, cool. I just want to make sure that everything's working in the chat. All right, so for example, our technology. We have found ancient technology that has been petrified and turned into rock as well. This slideshow happens to be on automatic right now, but all around the world, people are excavating and digging up and mining, and they find all of these strange ancient forms of technology that have become a part of the rock. They've become petrified and a part of if you were to walk past it and you might not give it a second chance, you would be like, oh, it's just rock, But a lot of this ancient world was petrified and solidified and densified. I'm going to talk to you about how here in a bit. And you'll see all kinds of evidence easily searchable on the internet. Those fans of Ancient Aliens, the television show, has probably seen many examples of petrified technology and how the gods have left these things behind. And we stumble across them. We find them. I throw the Death Star in there for my own reasons, okay? Because it has to do with the moon and what we call the sun actually being ancient technology that have survived until today. But that's a different subject. Now, along with organic beings, right? Along with sentient life forms like the Titans and the gods, along with technology, we also have our flora and our fauna, our plants. Relaine just funded $20 on Super Chat. Thanks, Relaine. We have our flora and our fauna, which means our plants, our fruits, our vegetables, things like that, that have also survived and become petrified from this ancient world. It's important to know as we go forward, and I'm going to explain it here in just 1 second. I'll give you the entire synopsis and short story of it. The whole ancient world was petrified and turned into rock. What you're looking at right now are what we accept at face value: petrified trees. These are plants that have become rock. Now, maybe a few hundred years ago, if I were to walk up to someone and there was a tree right next to us, alive and living, and I said, behold, I'm going to turn this tree into a rock, I would be laughed at. If I did that today, people would probably laugh at the concept. You can't turn a tree into a rock, and yet we have this division in our minds. We have these mental separations when it comes to various subjects. We can't imagine organic life forms changing into stone or rock, and yet we all have been taught, we all have seen examples of petrified wood, right? Wood is a plant. It's an organic life form, and it has changed into stone. So that's one evidence, that's one proof that it is possible. Now, not only is it possible and factual and has happened, and we have plenty of examples of it all over our world, it actually is very expensive to buy petrified wood. They don't really want you to get your hands on any evidence, so they make it hard to get a hold of. But that's another example. These petrified trees, right? Trees that once grew and were living and breathed the air and drank the water. Your Heart is a Portal funded $420. Thank you so much, Your Heart is a Portal. But we accept this at face value. We know that trees can turn into rocks. This is something that has been taught to us, has been shown to us over and over, and we know about it. It's not something we investigate. It's not something we question or look into, which I believe that we should be, because these are breadcrumbs. These are clues that have been left to us from an ancient, obliterated history. I refer to it as ancient oblivion. It is our esoteric past that has not been shared with us. Why? Because knowledge is power. They don't want you to understand where you came from, because then you realize who you are and what you are empowered to do. So, Those are the petrified trees, you know? It would be a ridiculous concept to say, look, I'm going to turn this tree into a rock, and yet we accept it. We know that that's a reality. We know that trees can turn into rocks. Now, allow me to go through the short story of our ancient history. Okay, I'm going to wrap it all up in a quick little story, okay? What had happened? What do the schools not teach us? What are we not allowed to know about? Basically, a long time ago, on the same realm that we live in now, there were titans. They came here to shape our world. They came here to form it, right? So they are responsible for the valleys and the hills and the mountains and much of it at the very least. They are also responsible for much of its destruction. Now, the Titans existed. They lived off of the land itself. Many people ask me about, like, what did they eat and stuff. We'll get into that later. But then along came the god race, the giants, if you will. The Titans were colossal. They were the size of skyscrapers and whatnot. Then you have the next race to come, which are the giants, or the god race, the El, the Elohim, the elven race, as I refer to them. The silica-based beings who are commonly mistaken for reptilian and fish gods, things of that nature. Then we'll get into the religious aspect here in a bit as well. So, the Titans existed. They were terraforming the world. Along comes the El, or the god race. They're trying to coexist. They end up going to war with one another. Now, the Titans, as you can see, there's sort of this giant mountain in the background of the picture there, and it's sort of cut. There were these ancient petrified trees, as I was talking about. The Titans cut down these huge silica pillars that I refer to, and many others refer to, as the giant trees that once existed, that have turned into our mesas or buttes or flat tops or tabletops of today. They have petrified and solidified, along with all of the rest of our ancient and esoteric history that's been kept from us. So the Titans cut down our sylvan world, our forest world, our garden paradise. It falls literally and physically and energetically. And the gods are not too happy about this because they are the El, or the elven race. They live in the forest. They live amongst the trees and the giant flora and fauna of the world. So they go to war with one another. The gods clash against the Titans, their fathers, and they all war with one another basically for who's going to rule the world. You know, they're fighting over territory. They're fighting over areas and things like that. Now, various ancient weapons were developed. Now, there was a war between the Titans and the gods that carried with it technology that you can't comprehend today. Technology that is it's an amalgam, it's a mesh, it's a combination of magic, what we would refer to as magic, or the manipulation of energy which exists, okay, and permeates all things, along with technology as well. So infusing technology with the energy, weapons that you can't even begin to think about. And that's why I put the picture of the Death Star up there earlier, because I wanted to give you an idea of what type of weapons these gods, these titans, these ancient beings were capable of. This was a war of wars. You can't. Our wars are petty. Our wars are small and tiny, shooting little bullets at each other and shooting missiles and things like that. The weapons that the gods had access to fight the Titans were much more devious than what we've come up with today. So this war went on, and ultimately cataclysm was unleashed in the form of flooding the entire world. Now, it's commonplace. We know that the world was flooded. We know and understand throughout various religions and ancient stories across every culture and time, throughout time, that the world had been flooded. And it's commonly accepted that it was flooded by the gods themselves in order to destroy the bad guys, right? The bad gods or the bad titans, etc. Now, as a part of this flooding, either before or during, all life became solidified. It became petrified. The Titans turned into the islands. If you've ever seen the movie Moana, it's a perfect example how you have this huge Titan that turns into rock and stone. I'm not saying all mountains are Titan bodies. I'm not saying all hills, etc., but all of the ancient world itself did become a part of the earth. Okay? Now, we'll get into that as well. As it became a part of the earth, the ancient world literally solidifies and turns into rock and stone. Then comes man. Man is introduced into this world, and this rock world, this age of stone, is all he knows. It's all he's familiar with. He looks around and takes it for granted. And he just sees something and labels it, that's earth, that's rock, that's boulder, that's mountain. Not knowing what it came from, not knowing its origins. At least not now. I'm not sure, what ancient man was taught at the time, but everything in that ancient world had petrified and turned into rock. And this gives us, this is not something I'm speculating on or making up off the top of my head. It's not just fairy tales that I base these things off of. However, this was known. This was common knowledge. This was taught a long time ago, before our world was basically taken over and our access to knowledge was limited and predetermined of what we were allowed to know and what we were allowed to stumble upon and whatnot. However, in this age, not only do we have the internet, but personally, I believe that we are returning to a time where people have access to what's known as the ether, or the energy that permeates all things, and there are revelations just coming to people, and then there's evidence to back up the revelation falling into people's laps. So that's the short version. This is known right now as mud fossil theory. Basically, the mud had washed over the world with the floods. It wasn't just water, but it was all of the debris. Because remember, I said that the Titans were miners. They were excavators. They were terraformers. They were the shapers of the world. And because of all of that terraforming and mining and digging and whatnot, it left behind a lot of debris. So imagine the debris of Titans across the world being mixed with tsunamis and floods. So that gives us our mud floods, which basically cover everything, deprive it of oxygen. It solidifies and becomes petrified and turns into rock. Now, that being said, so the Titans died. They died off, and where they died, they turned into stone. Whether it be petrification due to the lack of oxygen being trapped in the muddy waters, or some sort of advanced or anciently advanced technology that they had, some sort of weapon that maybe, possibly, could have turned people into stone. This is something that's survived all of our legends and myths, that these beings can turn into stone. We know organic matter can turn into stone. Like I said, I gave you one example with the petrified trees. We'll get into more hardcore examples a little bit later on. However, the giants, the gods, whoever was caught up in this weaponry, they froze in place right where they were. Whatever they were doing, they turned into stone. This is why we talk about the trolls. The trolls, they see the light of the sun and they turn into stone. So where they died stood a monument to their death. Where they died literally stood stones. And when man came along, they could see those standing stones and they could say, oh, that represents the death of a being. That represents the death of a god or a titan or whatnot. And so they revered them. There are these standing stones all over our world. Thousands and thousands of standing stones all across our realm. Let me just check in on the chat. Okay, good. So there are these standing stones all across our realm, everywhere today. Some of them in the most random of places. And the best that we can come up with in our school system is that, ancient cavemen, they moved those around. The druids or whoever, they moved them around. Now this is an interesting picture. This is from an area, I believe in France, known as Karnak. Right? Now Karnak has been featured on Ancient Aliens many times. They are the standing stones. It's mysterious. People speculate. They don't know what they're there for. The most popular theory for these standing stones is they are places of strong energy. Like that ancient man erected all these stones to sort of manipulate the energy of the world. Now, I'm going to tell you this, that where the giants, where the gods stood, where they petrified and died, became a marker. It was a stone marker of death, and everyone knew what it meant. And so we, wanting to be like them, as we always do, wanting to emulate our gods and our ancestors and those who came before, we also erect stones in the place of the dead. Wherever our dead are, wherever our dead fall, we erect our own stones. This is the origin of where the tombstone comes from. It's a stone, it's a grave marker.
Sorry guys, dealing with some stuff.
It's a standing stone, etc.
What's up, all you guys here?
It's the exact same thing, and that's where we get it from. That's where it comes
Goodness.
from. We emulate and take after.
It's gone a little longer than I thought.
You know, we don't. A lot of what we have today, we get it because it has been passed down to us. It's nothing that we really came up with on our own. But the gods and the ancient world was all petrified, and it stood in place wherever it was. And these are the markers of where those beings or vegetation or technology, whatever it may have been, once was before it met its end. Now, that being said, many of these standing stones are sacred. Many of them are holy sites. Many people from all around the world, I'm not just talking about the three major religions either, I'm talking about all cultures around the world, have some sort of form of rock worship, right? They will go to these areas because they believe that, the energy is different there, which it very well may be. Pardon me, I had to cough. The energy is different there. And so people make pilgrimages. They go and they pray at these holy sites. And they are known as standing stones. They are the tombstones. They are the sacred stones. Now, this brings us into a really interesting topic because now we're getting more into religion. So let's talk about religion and how it's directly related to the worship of these stones or these rocks, right? I'm going to bring up some quotes. I'd like to start with the most popular religion in my particular region, Christianity and the Bible. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to read some quotes, and this is not an extensive list whatsoever, okay? So keep this in mind. These are some things that I took about, half an hour to just Google and pick out some of the best examples. But before I get into the Bible quotes about the rocks and the gods and how they're interrelated, I want to let you know, another word for the standing stones are the menhir. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, but I believe it's menhir. And the origin or the etymology of the word menhir, or menhir, right, is men, M-E-N, which means stone. And then the H-I-R here means long. So it's interesting to me that the word men is directly related to the word stone, right? So literally it could be tall men or long men, right? The menhir. I found that to be an interesting coincidence, although I don't really believe in coincidences. So let's get into religion and rocks, and what do they have to do with the ancient gods or titans? I'm going to read some Bible verses for you, so we'll go take a couple of minutes to go through some of these. Just listen to them and allow the story to develop in your own mind based on what we've already gone over. Genesis 19:26, but Lot's wife looked back and became a pillar of salt. Actually, I think I have a pillar of salt. Lot's wife looked back and became a pillar of salt, aka rock, right? Luke 3:8 says, therefore bear fruits worthy of repentance, and do not begin to say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father, for I say to you that God is able to raise up children to Abraham from these stones, right? So much. It's so funny whenever you bring up quotes like that, especially from the Bible.
Yeah, it's about the best book there is.
Agree with the literal meaning of it,
A lot more interesting than they add on in church.
That's not being literal, etc. It literally says God is able, right, to raise up children from these stones. Luke 19:40 says, "But he answered and said to them, I tell you that if these people should keep silent, the stones would immediately cry out." Interesting how the stones are being personified as if they could possibly have the ability to act as we do, right? Joshua 24:27, and Joshua said to the people, "Behold, this stone shall be a witness to us, for it has heard all of the words of the Lord which he spoke to us. It shall therefore be a witness to you, lest you deny your God." So now the stone is a witness. The stone is capable of hearing and bearing witness, meaning recording information.
Yeah, I got the book of Enoch right here.
Coins and things like that to record information. Stones and crystals and things like that have long been known to
Give a
be
thumbs
able
up,
to
guys.
hold
Supposed to help with
and
the algorithm.
contain,
Please.
knowledge and information. So it's no surprise that these stories in the Bible talk about allowing a stone to remain a witness between two people. 2 Samuel 2:22.
Yeah, it's probably just not
"For
showing
who
me.
is God besides the Lord, and who is a rock besides our God?" The Lord is our rock. God is our rock. Now, I'm not really quoting a particular verse. That's actually in there many, many, many times. It refers to God as being our rock. Now, that's where a lot of people will stop and say, "Oh, that's metaphorical. It just means that he's solid. He's a solid dude." I'm not so sure, based on all the research that I've been going through myself. It says that God is a rock, and it's talking about the rocks as being personified and having sentient qualities. Acts 4:11, "He is the stone which was rejected by you." Now, that one's talking about Jesus as well. I find this all to be very interesting. 1 Corinthians 10:4,
I haven't read the second
"And
one.
all
I didn't.
drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and the rock was Christ." 1 Peter 2:4, "And coming to him as to a living
Yeah, no, I only have the
which
first
was
one.
rejected by men, but is choice and precious in the sight of God." And finally, for the biblical verses, we've got Isaiah 26:4.
Is that what it's called? The Lost
"Confide
Books?
ye in Jehovah forever.
Well, I
For
know
in
they took all the
Jah,
books out.
Jehovah is the rock of ages." And of course, that's just one translation. I'm not going to get into all the pronunciation.
I definitely haven't gone through that all of them.
Its name and stuff like that. However, I can tell you that if you look on that tablet, it actually does say the name of the God. But if you want more on that information, please check out my video, Enki and the 10 Commandments. Okay? Enki and the 10 Commandments. Basically, it says Enki wrote the 10 Commandments. Right? So now let's move on from Christianity and let's go to another popular religion, Islam. Right? Now, in the Islamic tradition, they have the Kaaba stone. Many of you who have tumbled down some parts of the rabbit hole have come across the Kaaba stone, especially whenever researching Saturn or Kronos worship. Saturn was one of the ancient titans, the father of the gods or giants. Kronos as well. He was a titan. And that this pops up whenever you look into Saturn worship, you'll come across the whole black cube and the symbolism there. Welcome, Dean. So the black stone of the Kaaba stone, right? The black stone, I'm going to read this, plays a central role in the ritual of Islam. When pilgrims kiss the black stone, they touch it with their hands or they raise their hands toward it while repeating the takbir. God is greatest. They perform this in the course of walking 7 times around the Kaaba in a counterclockwise direction. So here we have another example of stone worship, right? Of worshiping rocks, essentially, or giving rocks the attributes of a god, or being representatives of ancient titans or a godlike race. Let me go ahead and just skip the picture here real quick. Okay, so that's the Kaaba stone. Well, that's not really the stone itself. That's the building that encompasses it. But the stone is on there as well. I might have a picture of it. Let's see here. There it is. So that's the Kaaba stone. It's this black stone. There's, various myths about it, but that's the main one there. Now, along those lines, A small minority of Muslims accept as literal truth a hadith, usually taken as allegorical, which asserts that the stone will appear on the day of judgment with eyes to see and a tongue to speak, and give evidence in favor of all who kissed it in true devotion, but speak out against whoever indulged in gossip or profane conversations during his circumambulation of the Kaaba. So, according to this lore, the Kaaba stone itself is literally going to come alive and be able to speak. It has these sentient qualities that are attributed to it as well. And then, of course, I believe this is from the Quran itself. They said, this is talking about the people, the population, after we turn into bones and fragments, will we get resurrected anew? And the response is, even if you turn into rocks or iron, even if you turn into any kind of creation that you deem impossible, then they will then say, who will bring us back? And say to them, the one who created you in the first place. So I found that to be an interesting passage as well. They're asking basically, he says, if you turn into rocks, we have the ability to bring you back. That's some serious technology, first of all. But it's also talking about organic beings turning into rock. And then, of course, we have, let me just get the different picture pulled up here. Oh, Golgotha, right? The place of the skull. This is, I believe this is a picture of Golgotha in Jerusalem. It's known as the place of the skull, right? Not the place of a little skull, but the place of a very large skull, Titanic skulls, which are actually all over the place. If you do a simple Google search, you'll find all kinds of skull rocks everywhere. And then we have the Dome of the Rock. This is another place in Jerusalem. Those of you who have studied religion know that this is, a hotly debated area in Palestine, aka Israel, aka all kinds of other names for it. But the Jews and the Muslims, they basically fight over this particular area, and it's the Dome of the Rock. This is a holy rock. This is another sacred rock that people go to. So that's the religious portion of this particular video. Now let's get into our expressions, the things that we talk about, and where do they come from, their origins. So we have a lot of expressions whenever it comes to the rocks, and some of them are very interesting. For example, how about to be petrified, to be scared to death? We say I'm petrified, I'm petrified. Why would we say that? Why would we say I'm so scared that I have turned into rock? That's basically what that means, right? It goes back to the ancient hidden past when the Titans, the gods of old, they were so terrified at what was happening during the wars between the gods and the Titans, they turned into rock and froze in place. That's where the expression comes from. It doesn't make sense for anything else. I'm petrified, I'm turned into stone, or otherwise people could just say, I've become frozen like ice. It would be more along the lines of like ice or something that's frozen or things of that nature. But they are petrified because they are scared to death. Just like the Titans were scared to death of the waters, the deluge, the flood that encompassed the world that they drowned in, which we're actually going to get to. It's interesting things here in a minute about the gargoyles. So we've got petrified, to literally be so scared that you turn into rock. Then we've got rock music, right? I find this one to be really interesting. Why do we call it rock music? I'm sure a lot of you have wondered that over and over. You've just never vocalized it. You've never talked about it. Maybe on occasion you might say, hey, why do we call it rock? I don't know, because it rocks, we say these things. These are the types of idioms. These are the types of statements and sayings and expressions that we have had passed down to us that we no longer question its origin. We just accept it. We take it for granted. Or we take it for granted. Whichever one you want. I do throw in cheesy jokes. I'm sorry. However, getting back to rock music, right? Now, if you think about a lot of the rock music, especially heavy metal, right? That's like the people that did heavy metal. They had to like one up the rock people, so it had to become metal instead. However, all of the rock music, all of the heavy metal. Now, I'm not saying that the music's bad. I'm not taking sides on that topic or anything. But what I am saying is that, you see like the people throwing the devil horns and all that stuff. The devil horns, the horns of the gods, the silica beings, they all go back to this ancient world that has been kept hidden from us. The story is not told anymore. We've been distracted and looking at the ground and not investigating and not living, really. But that's why it's associated with the rock music. The rock is the symbol for the gods and the ancient titans, and that's why they will throw up the horns and stuff like that. And because it's associated with the rock music and the musicians selling their soul to the devil, etc. It's all interrelated to the rocks, to the Stone Age, the Age of Stone, the age where the titans, the gods, the old world had all become petrified, and it gives homage to that, or to the energies therein. We also have, aside from being petrified, rock music, heavy metal, being stoned to death. That's an older one, right? That's something people used to do. Why would they stone people to death? There are so many other ways to execute that particular judgment upon an evildoer. Well, it's because that they would take the stones. The stones represented little pieces of the gods, little pieces of the titans, and the titans were the executioners. They're the ones that cast judgment. They're the ones that carried out judgment on the people. So the people would throw literally little pieces of the gods, little pieces of the ancient titans, and they were basically to blame. They were the ones casting judgment, which were the gods, not the people themselves. That's why they would throw rocks. And then, of course, we have being stoned. That's a popular one. Why do they call it being stoned? When people are getting high, and smoking various herbs and plants in order to enter the spirit world, it's not being stoned like you're just as dumb as a rock when you get high. That's not really where that comes from. It's to be stoned, just like the giants and the gods. In their time, you have to understand, their time was much, much different than our time is today. The world, our realm was much different. There was magic, and it was not taken for granted. People knew about the energy that existed within themselves and in the world around them and in other things, okay? So, not only did the world fall literally and physically, not only did these beings fall literally and physically and energetically, they also fell, right? So that's why it's to be stoned, is to be in the spirit realm, the realm of the gods. And then, of course, we have something to be written in stone, or set in stone. Oh, it's set in stone. It's done. You know what I mean? That goes back to the whole Ten Commandments thing of the religion, where you write something in stone because you're basically putting it on the skin of the gods. You're saying like the gods approve of this because the gods had turned into rock. The titans had turned into rock. And so it's now set in stone or approved by the gods. It's not going to be changed without their divine permission. I forgot how to say that. That's actually an important phrase in the Illuminati world, is nothing without their permission, which is also interesting, but it's a different topic, so let's move forward. To get blood from a stone. When something's very difficult, they said, oh, it's like getting blood from a stone, Why would that be an expression? Why not be like getting water from a stone, or getting plastic from a stone, or, they say, wow, my face was doing that weird thing with the green screen. Oh, he's reptilian. No, I'm just kidding. So anyhow, getting blood from a stone is an expression that we use today. There is a reason why it is an expression, because it carries truth with it. There is blood in the stone, and it is very difficult to extract. It's not liquid blood for the most part anymore. It's solidified, it's densified, it's become petrified. The blood right there along with the tendons and the fat and the skin and other parts of the body, the bones, etc. But that's where the expression comes from, to get blood from a stone. Why else would they say that unless it literally was possible, but very, very difficult to do, right? And of course, to be stone dead, right? that can't be a true expression unless the stones were at some point in time alive, right? You can't be stone dead unless, of course, there was a point at which the stones themselves were alive. And now they're stone, which means they are dead. The giants, the titans, they all died and turned into stone. They are now stone dead. That's where that comes from. Okay, so let's move on to the next point here. I would like to talk about the gargoyles, the Gorgons, and the eternal curse that was placed upon those who died in the ancient war between the Titans and the gods. Those who died in the flood or the deluge, you know. And I know many of you refer to all of these things I'm talking about in all of your wonderful various forms. You know, maybe you have more of a religious stance, or maybe more of a scientific stance, or whatever it may be. Just put your own words into what I'm saying to make it fit, okay? But I'm talking about those who died in the flood, in the cataclysm, when Atlantis fell, all of those types of stories, right? Those who turned into stone and were petrified because they were scared to death, these turned into the gargoyles. They are the Gorgon of old. The Gorgon, the giant ones, the titanic ones. Let's go ahead and go through some pictures here. The Titans were the Gorgon. They were, the word literally comes from like to be gigantic, awesome, you know, so big that it's scary, etc. It also comes from the throat, right, which is where we get our word gargle, because these beings drowned and they were gargling, etc. They drowned in this muddy tsunami of floodwaters that encompassed our realm. And because this is how they met their end, drowning and being petrified as well, like the myths and the legends and the stories all say, essentially symbols of this were developed as a representation of the eternal curse. At least not eternal as in forever. Eternal literally means like until the end of an age, okay? I'm not sure if you guys knew that, but that's what eternal literally means, okay? Eternal does not mean forever without end. It just means up until the end of an age, okay? So the eternal curse of the Gorgon were to turn into the gargoyles, or to eternally be drowning, to eternally be a stone figure monster that, you know, I'm not sure you know this, but gargoyles are basically only there not to scare away the evil spirits and whatnot, because they are the evil spirits, but they're there as a curse. They're there as a reminder of what happens to evil should it go up against the other side, that they will eternally drown. They will spit up this water and basically be throwing up water forever. The whole purpose of a gargoyle is to be put onto a building, for the most part, so it'll redirect the rainwater, so it doesn't damage the building in the long run. Now that turned into decoration and statues and things of that nature, but that's where it comes from. The Gorgon, the gargoyles, the gargamels of the old world, they were eternally cursed to be stone and to continuously drown. Now, this makes sense because, as we know, fantasy reveals much of our truth. A lot of the truth that has been kept from us has been granted to us. It's been given back to us in the form of fiction and stories, cartoons, movies, books, and fairy tales. And we find these breadcrumbs, these little nuggets of wisdom, whenever we go over these things. So, for example, the giants and the titans drowning and being petrified of the water itself in these ancient times comes up in our legends of today, in our movies as well. This sequence of pictures is from the movie BFG. Now, BFG stands for Big Friendly Giant. It's a movie that's come out, highly esoteric. I love it and highly recommend it. But for some reason, these titans, you know, these are two titans right here. These titans are all petrified of the rain, of water itself. You know, and in the movie they make it very clear that when it rains, or, you know, there's a point at which somebody was going to douse them with water, they turn into babies and children. They're screaming, don't touch me with the water. It's not explained. It is not told to us. But it's not just BFG. It's many different movies that show these giants or titans or aliens or whatever they may be, witches, as being so terrified of the water, They're just petrified of the water. Why are they petrified of the water? It's because the waters are what killed these beings. The flood waters of the world, the deluge of Atlantis and Lemuria and other places, this is what destroyed their entire race. So it is become a metaphor. It's become a word picture in these stories. It's become a breadcrumb that's handed down to us, letting us know these beings are terrified of water for a reason. And it's fallen to us to discover what that reason is. The reason is because they all drowned within these flood waters and turned into stone. So, let's move on to the next point. The next thing to talk about is it even possible? Let me go ahead and let me pull up some pictures here for us to look at while I do this. Alright, so is it possible? A lot of people talk to me about this and they ask, is it even possible that the Titans even lived? If the Titans lived, wouldn't they grow to be so big that their muscles wouldn't support their bodies or their bones would crumble underneath all of that weight, etc.? And I find myself thinking how funny it is because, if I could jump into the mind of an ant or a small bug or something, does that thought ever cross their mind? How are those humans so gigantic? Don't they crumble under their own weight, etc.? No, it's very possible that Titans and giants all grew to be this size, very proportionate in their biology, their physiology, their chemistry, etc. It's not only is it plausible, but it did happen, and we have records of it all across the world. So, what would they eat? People ask me that all the time. Well, what would the Titans eat? Well, they began by eating what was available. The earth at that time was referred to as a garden paradise in all these different cultures across the realm. It was a garden world, and therefore they ate the gigantic fruits that were supplied from that garden. Right? However, like I said, they also were destroying much of the earth. So as they destroyed their own supplies, and actually I'll show you some pictures of, for example, mushrooms. There are gigantic mushrooms all over the place. I'm going to talk about that here towards the end, though, the mushroom kingdom of the world and the reality of it. But they had plenty to eat up until a certain point in time, in which case they started to eat the animals and the sentient beings, the gods, the humans, those that survived the cataclysms. They began to eat those things because the Titans were responsible for turning our world into a stripped out quarry world, a desert world that doesn't have a whole lot of food left in it, right? So they began eating whatever they could get their hands on. I'm not really handling the slideshow very well, am I? So these are just some examples of some ancient giant trees and whatnot. So, is it possible? What would they eat? What would they wear? You have to imagine, this is hypothesized to have been a silicon-based world, or a silica-based world. Because the second most abundant material in our world today is the silica that exists under our feet. I believe, the air is, number one. But it was a silica-based world, and, they might not have had a need for clothing. Various religions talk about how there really weren't major storms, the further back in time you go, towards the beginning of creation. There were no oceans. I imagine that the world was a more lovely place weather-wise. They may not have had, and I'm speculating a little bit based on my own research, but they may not have had the disturbing weather patterns that we have today. I very much doubt that the Titans had to deal with lightning as we deal with it today. I do believe that lightning was created as a weapon. Like I said, they had these weapons that were unimaginable back in those times. But that's a different story. So, what would they eat? What would they wear? They might not need to wear anything. So people are like, oh, they must have had gigantic, private parts, I'm trying to keep this G-rated. They must have had gigantic private parts. Well, much of these ancient traditions that talk about the oldest forms of the Titans, okay? I'm talking about Gaia, Ymir, Atlas, these older Titans, the beginning Titans, the very first Titans, may not have had a sex physically of any type. They may have been both in one body without the physical sexual organs or whatnot. Now that's a little bit more speculative. However, I do know that these satanic, sects and cults around the world, when they draw images like the Baphomet and things like that, that represent their titans that they worship, they're always dual sex, right? They're always showing that they're male and female at the same time. They're hermaphrodites. Not physically. I'm not so sure that when we go that far back that it's something, and I know that that's a disturbing image these days to think about, but I think it's symbolic when they show the male and female parts on one body. I'm not so sure, and I'm not very convinced that the Titans literally walked around as physically both male and female, but they had the male and the female energy all in one, okay? So I believe that that's what that's going back to. So what would they wear? They might not have needed to wear clothing whatsoever. Not only that, but the stories of the gods that have survived our test of time, they make it into comic books, and we revere these beings as being the superheroes of old. Now, a lot of these superheroes in our myths and legends and fairy tales, they can withstand all types of temperatures, from extreme heat to extreme cold. Why? What is the reason for this? Maybe they were silica-based. Maybe their composition of their skin was that which could withstand cold temperatures. And so it makes sense that we have in Norse mythology the realm of the frost giants. We have Jotunheim, where they live in the cold regions. I gotta stop getting so close to the camera because people are gonna do reptilian hit pieces on me. It's just the green screen, I swear. So anyhow, what would they wear? Is it possible? That's really the question, How would they live their lives? How would they live, etc.? How is it possible for beings to turn into stone? Well, I didn't pull up a picture of it, but I did put out a video called The Petrifying Well. Highly suggest checking it out. It's a very short video, but there are various places in the world called petrifying wells. These are wells with water, where people go and they hang items, or they put items into the well where the water is dripping down off of rocks and things like that. And these items only take a few months before they actually turn into stone themselves. And, my bad. I'm just trying to pull up some imagery so we can look at stuff while we do this. So anyhow, please do check out my video about the petrifying well, or go ahead and Google it and do some research on it as well. It is possible for things, and things do currently turn into stone. People have turned all kinds of random everyday objects, from teddy bears to shoes, boots, hats, and organic life, into stone. It does happen all of the time, and we're able to do it, to replicate it. Not only are we able to replicate it, but there is one story about a man named Girolamo Sagato. I'm going to make a joke. I love calling him Girolamo Sagato, Mr. Mudfaso. Anyway, I have to say that. That's the only time I will say it. But Girolamo Sagato, or Girolamo Sagato, go ahead and do a Google search on it. I'm not going to bring up any images because they're very gory, okay? They're very disturbing, and, I'm trying to keep it G-rated. But Girolamo Sagato is known and infamous for having turned human beings, humans, like you and I, into rock. He literally turned them into stone. This is not to be confused with mummification, okay? This is a man, a scientist, if you will, a doctor, who figured out how to petrify the human body. And his examples of his work are left to us today. There are museums with petrified busts of women. And I put onto my Instagram account some pictures of like some tables. He made furniture out of the petrified remains of human bodies, which I know is disturbing. However, it's very much true. And the reason that the furniture can survive for so long is because it's rock. He knows how to turn people into, or he knew how to turn people into rock. Guess what happened to Girolamo Sagato? That's right, all his work was destroyed in a mysterious manner, and he disappeared, right? He died. along with all of his esoteric information on how this was all done. So it's still a mystery to many people today. So why would that be taken away from everybody, you know? Why would people not want that information to be out there? It's the same reason that Edward Leedskalnin in Florida back in, I believe, the 1920s, Edward Leedskalnin, he built the Coral Castle. He built an entire castle made of rock or coral for himself, megalithic stones that this old man could not possibly have carried around or maneuvered by himself. And yet, he did. And he died with that secret. You know, he took that secret to his grave as well. This is all information that they don't want us to have. So, we talked about the petrifying well. We talked about, is it possible to petrify organic material, to petrify a human being? Absolutely. So even more so, a silica-based being, basically a rock biter, you know, a being that's made of a sort of crystal-like quality to give it a shiny appearance and to help it to withstand the elements, right? And last but not least, we've got Roger Spurr from Mud Fossil University. Now, Roger Spurr from Mud Fossil University, he had basically tested out some specimens of rock that he believed and was convinced beyond the shadow of a doubt were old body parts from an ancient world, right? He had them tested out, and he tested to see if they contained human or human-like DNA, and he also had them CAT scanned. Now, I didn't want to put the image of the DNA test results, you know, up on the screen, but if you'd like to see them for yourself, go to mudfossils.com, scroll down to the bottom of the screen, and there's a link right there. You can read over the results of the DNA test on rocks. Now, thank you to Mud Fossil University for doing that and giving us that piece of the puzzle. Now, getting into the DNA being found in the rocks. Remember, one of our expressions was, it's so difficult, it's like getting blood from a stone, right? There literally was DNA found, and there is DNA found in our rocks that we have today. We have DNA tests to prove it, and this gives us insight into the creation myth. You know, the legends about where man comes from. Many of those legends and those stories basically say that man was created as a golem creature out of mud, that man was taken. The materials to make man were the earth itself, whether it be mud or rock, you know, sand, things of that nature. But the materials of the earth itself supplied the building blocks of life in order to create humankind or mankind, right? So now whenever we read, for example, in the Bible, it talks about Adam and Eve having been made from and sculpted from the clay of the earth, right? The clay of the earth for the gods who survived the cataclysm literally carried with it the building blocks to create us, to create a brand new race. Of course, a very modified brand new race, inhibited brand new race, and yet there it is. The DNA is in the rocks. The blood is still there. It's petrified, but it can be found. But that gives us a better understanding of these stories, these myths, as many religious people take as being truth. You know, it's so funny, like I was saying, you know, some religious people, when it comes to whether or not something's metaphorical or not in their religious books, when it says mankind was made from the clay of the earth, they're like, nope, that's true. Mankind was totally made from because God can do anything, right? That's sort of the explanation. Well, I'm offering a better explanation. I'm offering an explanation with a little more information than simply God can do anything, okay? The reason why mankind was made from the clay of the earth is because the clay of the earth was the remnants from the mud fossils that had survived these cataclysms, these ancient wars between the Titans and the gods, where these beings were turned into stone. Now, those gods, they took and shaped the DNA because they were geneticists, basically, and had far advanced knowledge than we do today. If anyone that's, you know, researched the Anunnaki knows this, they were also geneticists. They knew how to manipulate things. These beings were immortal. They lived for thousands of years. Do we not think that they would acquire skills far advancing our advanced society of today? Of course. So they took the DNA that was already in the rock and they manipulated and created a brand new type of being, or a similar type of being, I should say, because it's not entirely brand new. The legends and the stories all indicate that the gods experimented. They had different classes or different races, if you will, different versions of this man that they were making. And it very well may be that all of these creation myths all across our realm today, that they're not all talking about this one event, this one God that created this one race of beings, etc. Because all these, see, that's a problem with religions. They all want to take claim that their God is the one of all of the creation stories. What if all of the creation stories are all different creation stories? What if their gods had different geneticists working in different parts of the world, and they were literally just trying out different experiments to see what type of man they could come up with, giving these different versions of man 2.0 and 3.0, different attributes, and giving some of their own and mixing their own DNA in with the Titan DNA as well. Now, for me, this gives excellent evidence of the physical, sorry, I just read my notes here. Yeah, this helps to explain the physical differences that we see that are clearly evident in what we call the races of men, okay? Whether it be the skin or the hair or the eyes. Dennis Mitchell funded $4.99. Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate you. This helps to explain the variance between what we call the races of humanity, right? They each had their own gods. They each had their own creators, and they were experimented with. They were created in various ways with slight differences as they were, brought into being or whatnot. For me, that explains things much better than the way that it's traditionally told to us. Either the ape story or the two people and they all evolved into the different races that we have today. I believe that many of us are directly related to the elven race, or what we call the gods, which is why some people, especially around the Pacific Rim, worship the elven or the reptilian or the dragon race, etc., and why their eyes reflect that. Because the gods had those types of eyes. The Cyclops, the circle eyes, the Titans, had a different set of eyes. And there were different types of gods as well. You had, for example, you had the pure ivory-skinned gods. I mean, white gods, not Caucasian gods, okay? But the pure ivory-skinned gods of old that created their own types of races. You also had the dark elves, or I'm going to do a whole video about the dark elves, but they are the darker-skinned gods as well. And they may have had their own creations and experiments with their versions of man. Anyhow, I'm getting a little off topic, so let's go forward and let's wrap things up. So, I told you I was going to talk about the Mushroom Kingdom, okay? In this ancient garden paradise. And I always like to talk about this. Here where I live, in Colorado Springs, we have an area of these huge rock formations called the Garden of the Gods. Sorry about the slideshow. I know I'm not really giving you guys much to look at here. But we've got the Garden of the Gods, right? It's just a bunch of gigantic rocks, titanic rocks, actually, seemingly in the middle of nowhere that don't really seem to have a place there, that shouldn't really be there. It's called the Garden of the Gods. Why would they name it that? Because this world was once the Garden of the Gods. The gods themselves walked among us in their garden, and everything turned into rock. That's why we're in the Garden of the Gods here in Colorado. But there are many other gardens of the gods that have become petrified and turned into rock in your area of the world.
His voice is a little annoying, isn't it?
One particular organism that we had,
It's almost over.
was the mushrooms. Mushrooms played a huge role in this obliterated world, in this esoteric history that we have not been taught, but that has been passed down to us in the form of fantasy. Mushrooms were all over the place. Mushrooms were gigantic.
He's driving you guys nuts.
They were large in numbers. They were so large that some beings could live inside of them, believe it or not. And some of those mushrooms.
Hold on, let me see what we got.
In this ancient cataclysm and this war between the gods and titans. And guess what? We find them in our realm today. For more information about this particular subject, go ahead and check out my Smurf video.
My Smurf video.
Like, got a picture of the Smurfs on it. The Smurf story is real. Or is real. Right? So,
I thought this was interesting. Not to say I believe
to take that next big step in your career.
Any of it, or I mean, there are parts of it.
Because I now knew that there was a biblical precedent to a hollow earth or a subterranean realm. Of course, many people know about hell, Abraham's bosom, things like that. But I started to dig deeper and I found many passages, which we break down in the film. We go through a handful of passages, break them down contextually to get a better understanding that there are things going on inside the earth. So that really catapulted me into this area of research.
Do you actually think that it's like, because when people say hollow earth, they imagine, literally like a balloon or like
let's listen to these
ball,
fuckheads
right?
for a second.
Like all hollow on the inside. Is that what's going on, or are we talking more caverns and like different, like a whole honeycomb network going on? What's happening?
I think there's. It's one of those situations where it can be everything and all inclusive. And again, there's going to be a certain amount of speculation when we get into this because nobody, at least none of our colleagues, can really go down into the earth to explore it for ourselves. But many people have gone down, and so yes, there are caverns, there are massive networks of tunnel systems, even underground cities, ancient underground cities, which many people have written about. Some of them mystical, some of them just normal cities that any human can approach. But the other side of that is we're dealing with supernatural, or what we would say dimensions. There are many
like hell,
cultures
bud?
around the world, especially getting into the Native Americans and the South Americans, Mexican Indians, Mesoamericans, and they have many stories about going down into these cavernous systems. And then once they were there would be a ritual or a certain location that they could go to. There would be some type of a portal that would open up. And as strange as that may sound to some people, there's not always magic involved in opening up a portal. I mean, when you have ancient rites that take place up on the surface, leading a person down into the earth, some of these Native Americans, they would go through these protection rituals. Joseph Riverwind talks about they would go through protection rituals before they would go down into these caverns. Sometimes they would swim down through a waterway inside the earth. We've got bodies of water inside the earth. And then they would go through that cavernous system of water up into another location, and there would be a portal that they would swim through or crawl through, and then they would retrieve some type of an ancient object. Now, this object could be one of many different things, different types of artifacts, but then that object would be brought back to the surface world to prove that person's worth. That was kind of a ritual ceremony for somebody to become a man in order to be a warrior in their tribe. So you've got extra-dimensional qualities, extra-dimensional stories of some people will see it, some people won't. It depends on the person. Have they been communicating with entities? Have they gone through rituals on the surface before going down into the earth? There's a lot of variables that play into this. But I want to say that all of those aspects are true, but you bring the bottomless pit into the equation, and I think that is a very controversial area because, we have two major factions in research pertaining to the shape of the earth. You have people that believe in a flat earth, and then you have people that believe in a globe earth. Now, regardless of where people land on the shape of the earth, what we know for a fact is that there is a subterranean realm. But the idea of a bottomless pit, it's always been my idea, my belief system since I've entered into this research, that the bottomless pit would be the pole. We're dealing with a pole that's going to, and again, flat Earth, a lot of the flat Earth people don't like the idea of a North and South Pole because they say that that's not part of their model. But when you start to research it, you find out that God's word, regardless if you take the flat Earth or the round Earth side, there is a bottomless pit in the realm of Earth. So I take the idea, I lean more towards the idea that there are elements of elements of flat Earth and round Earth working together. I think you and I talked about this on an episode of Canary Cry, but I do believe there's a North and South Pole, absolutely. And I think that the pole would likely be a candidate for the bottomless pit.
So it's almost like a toroidal-shaped kind of donut.
You know, it's hard to say because I've never been up into space.
That's what I always say about all these topics with, or at least the shape of the Earth discussion. I always say I haven't been up high enough to tell you. Some people claim they have, but I think there's something that goes along with, you know, the abyss being something that the ancient Israelites saw as the seas, right? Kind of the ocean. But then that's not wrong either if we talk about maybe certain dimensional qualities. I had a story of, and there's no way for me to confirm this, but somebody that was in the military, or I had a friend whose son was in the military, and he said that, you know, usually he would call every week from his son just to kind of check in on, you know, how things are going. Well, he didn't get a call for a couple weeks, and, you know, a few weeks later he got a call and said, I couldn't call because I was under Arizona. And he's in the Marines, apparently he does like submarine work kind of stuff. You know, and they thought he was kind of joking, but he was like, no, I was under Arizona from the ocean. So you can get under Arizona from the ocean. I think there's a lot more going on, and the military knows a lot more. Did you find anything in your research that would suggest that there is some kind of cover-up of this, of at least an underworld?
Yeah, absolutely. In the film, we interview a wide variety. I think we got a lot of the heavy hitters from the Christian research area. I mean, we've got L.A. Marzulli, Steve Quayle, Timothy Alberino, Tom Horn, Joseph Riverwind, myself, Josh Peck, Derek Gilbert, Jim Wilhelmsen. L.A. Marzulli, he brings some stories about other military guys who had been over in the Middle East. Now, putting aside the whole Kandahar Giant thing, because these are two separate events, but there are stories of these teams of soldiers going down into cavernous systems. Now, they enter through a cave, so it's a cave on the surface, but they enter through it, and then they travel down. I mean, it's a clear path for them to go through. They're going down. Before they know it, they're down beneath the surface of the earth in these underground cities where giants are. And they tell stories of whole civilizations of modern day hybrids, giants, living down under the earth. Then you get over to the United States, and there are many stories, especially off the coast of California, that I've heard, where there will be UFOs they'll be seen over the water, they'll come down, they'll literally go underwater and just disappear. Now, it's my opinion that they're going down through some type of a gateway. Now, could it be that they're going underwater, entering in, you know, maybe flying into an opening in the ground? You know, I don't know. But what I do know is that this kind of lines up with the Hebrew understanding of the story of Jonah, which Tom Horn breaks down in our film about Baravak, or the city of gates. And breaking down the story of Jonah, we find out that Jonah went down to a place called the city of gates. And obviously, when we start to investigate the word gate, we find out that they're doorways, gates, portals, openings into another dimension or another realm. So I think there's a major connection, and you've seen the film. In the film, we showed that there's connections with spirits in water and entrances through water into the hollow earth. And again, I use the term hollow earth because that's the popular term that we find in the mainstream. Some people like to call it the subterranean realm. Some people call it hollow earth, whatever you want to call it. But many connections with spirits, entities, the water, and hollow earth. So, I probably went a little longer on that question than you anticipated.
No, it's good because I think if you really look back, there are a lot of stories like that. I know just in my youth, I was given a few stories, just Japanese folklore. So the first story I was referencing is the Utsurobune, or the hollow ship, and it refers to an unknown object which allegedly washed ashore in 1803 in Hitachi province on the east coast of Japan, and according to the legend, an attractive young woman arrived on a local beach aboard the hollow ship. And this image of the hollow ship is very interesting, as it looks kind of like a UFO. There's another one where actually there's a man who decides to is invited to go down into the world under the oceans or whatever. This is called the Urashima Taro, and it's a Japanese fairy tale. In the story, a fisherman named Taro rescues a turtle, which in gratitude carries him to the dragon palace that lies beneath or beyond the sea. There he is entertained by the Princess Otohime as a reward. He spends what he believes to be a few short days, but upon his return to his home village, he finds himself 300 years into the future. And when he opened a box that was given to him and was told never to open on the surface, he instantly turned into an old man. Basically, the box was holding his age, the actual time of his realm, which is very interesting and very similar to what modern physicists describe as the sort of time difference in experience that can occur when you go and travel far distances. And so, given in this folklore, this Japanese folklore, are weird time-shifting, preservation of time, youth, eternal youth type of overlap, but all coming from these entities with a civilization that lives underwater. So, yeah, absolutely, there's probably something going on down there that, James Cameron going down there, doing whatever, riding around in his little submarine thing. Like, you probably have plans to do something like that eventually.
Yeah, hopefully, if I can get the funding,
Yeah. So yeah, and I thought you did a really good job in the film to summarize all these different ideas, because there's a lot of evidence, and I think there's a lot of questions as to what's really going on. And you're right, it's hard to really nail down because it's like, what are we going to do? We can't like get up high enough to necessarily see anything. We can't necessarily go down far enough. Presumably without running into these entities, or at least maybe not being able to come back. How much of do you think people gone missing, people perhaps even faking their death, dare I say, celebrities or whatnot? Do you think that people are retiring, quote unquote, into that world? I mean, is it possible that there's stuff going on down there? If there's giants walking around, then is it possible that the high level, dark technology that they've been developing also exists, and people that science fiction galore down there with maybe they got Hitler on some kind of brain machine robot? I mean, I don't know, I'm just throwing stuff out there, but how many people do you think are in the know about something like this?
Well, the government is definitely in the know. Headlines across the globe, you've got these military groups going underground, setting up underground cities, underground bunkers. We have more underground or deep underground military bases and establishments where they are doing all types of research, transhumanism, creating of chimera embryos. We've got stories of the Dulce base, or Dulce. They've got the level down there that people call the zoo. And then you've got a level where there are entities that are in charge. And again, this is stuff that's really hard to vet. But, was it William Cooper, I believe? William Cooper. Am I getting his name right? Is it William?
Yeah, Bill Cooper.
William Cooper. Who's no longer with us. But he told stories of firsthand accounts, and he was a government geologist. And he says he was down there in multiple levels underneath the earth in the deep underground military bases. He came face to face with entities. There's a lot of very strange, spin-offs of his stories that we hear from different people who claim to have been down there or have family members who have been down there. But I think that there's a mixture. I know the government is doing a lot under the earth. The Nazis. This really takes us back to the Nazis when we start thinking about government involvement and what are the governments of the world doing inside the earth. The Nazis, they have a religious system set up, or they had. And that system was based on this esoteric belief that the Nazis were descendants from this race called the Aryans. And this was a supernatural race. It ties back to theosophy. You get into the Madame Blavatsky teachings. And the root races, you have this Aryan race that supposedly goes back to the days before the flood. And they were the underworld race. Like, they would come back and forth on the surface, under the surface. And the Nazis believed that they are a watered-down descendant of the Aryan race. And so it was their goal, first and foremost, to try to locate the opening to a hollow earth. There was a German magazine called Der Spiegel, and they came out, I forget what year it was, but they came out and they announced that we have found the opening to the hollow earth. And we also have to understand that most of Nazi Germany, at least by majority, was in support of the Nazi Party. Now, there was a lot of people that were not, they were not fans, they did not support Hitler, but by majority, they bought into this ideology that they were somehow supernaturally connected to this race called the Aryans, and they wanted to purify their bloodline, kind of like a dominionism theology of their day, where they could purify their bloodline and kind of set up their own kingdom to be reunited with the gods of old, the Aryan race. And so Hitler made it a major part of his checklist to get down into the Hollow Earth. We have multiple places where this took place. We know that they were welcomed by the Tibetan monks. They were able to go down into an area that they call Shambhala. This is the records that have been passed on say that the Nazis actually made it into the Hollow Earth in this area through the Himalaya mountains. And when they were able to go in there, they came into contact with this group called the White Brotherhood. Now, this isn't like the KKK. You know, it sounds kind of like that, but we're dealing with nothing less than the Ascended Masters. And so the Nazis were given entrance and sanctuary in Tibet. They were taken down with the monks. They were shown the secret places to get in. They had connections with entities. Then they came back. That was just one of their expeditions that took them into the Hollow Earth. Another expedition is Antarctica. And if we have time, I want to get into that. But that ties in with the American government as well, because there was a lot of fighting going on. And still to this day, there's so much interest in Antarctica. And I think it's important to note that Antarctica is on the record as having more than one opening. Not just one. We now have records from British intelligence and U.S. intelligence that there's multiple openings in Antarctica into this subterranean realm. Now, if you research what the Nazis did before the Exodus, I call it the Exodus, before, during, and after the Second World War, Nazis were already going down to Antarctica and setting up a secret base known as Base 211. So, and this is in their records. You can read about this. They had mapped it out. They had charted out the area, and they had set up this Base 211, which some people claim doesn't exist. But it had to have existed if we study what the Nazis did in their timeline. There was something down there that they had set up. What happened was they had faked Hitler's death after the war. And Hitler, along with many others, there are different records, different accounts that claim up to 1 million or a little over 1 million. Some people believe it was 500,000. But we've got a massive amount of Nazis. They're thinkers, they're doers, they're shakers, doctors, occult magicians, psychic mediums, scientists, everything. The elite of the Nazis that had the most brain power, they went on this massive exodus down to Antarctica. And they've been setting up shop down there. And so we find out later that this makes sense when we study Operation High Jump, because our government sent Admiral Byrd down into the Arctic. We had people from Britain and Australia going with us, and we went down there. They told the American public that it was going to be an exploration mission, and there's different things involved with that. But when we study the ships that were part of this, there was a massive undertaking that our government did, and they went down there. There was not one laboratory ship that was set up for scientific research. What we had icebreakers, we had warships. Literally, when they went down to Antarctica, they went down there prepared for war. And what we find out later is that this mission, this Operation High Jump, it ended much earlier than it was supposed to, because they met opposition down there. Some people speculate that the opposition was extraterrestrial in nature, because we do now have reports of British intelligence going to Antarctica and coming back reporting to have seen Yetis. Now, some people may laugh at this idea, but there are reports of, top, it blows my mind to even say this, but we're dealing with top security cleared British intelligence coming back and saying that they saw Yetis or abominable snowmen down there. Now, I don't have an answer for that. I can't tell you if it was some type of entity. I don't know if it was an entity. I don't know if it was a hybrid creation. It was created down there, some type of a chimera. I don't know. But it blows my mind to consider this, because now people are saying that they met a force with aliens down there. I believe, with all of my research, that we the Nazis down at Operation High Jump in Antarctica.
How does Carrington College prepare you for your career? Dedicated mentors and passionate instructors provide you this.
It sounds funny to me, actually. It's sad, because we're...
Motherfucker. Thought I had some other stuff. I'm not seeing it now. What the hell?
And whether an amendment, constitutional or otherwise, prevents the practice for religious institutions. So, the restriction I call them Hivites. So, yeah, there is a funny joke. Apparently, they jumped.
I guess I
in
didn't
the
prepare
swamp
too well
in
for tonight.
1948. But this article was important, and even though I covered it, I wanted to kind of go back over some of this stuff.
What, call right
One
now?
of the things that I think is super important to note, it's something that I notice, and I tend to notice patterns. And
What's up?
something that I've noticed is,
How's it going, girl?
so it says here that Donald Trump was correct, and he usually is, that Lyndon Johnson passed legislation limiting political activity of churches. And when you go down here, it said, in his acceptance
Nothing. They want me to
speech
call
at
this
the
number.
Republican
I don't know.
National
I'm just
Convention,
not feeling it tonight.
presidential candidate Donald Trump singled out the
Oh, I'm glad you're
evangelical
here.
and religious community for their assistance in getting him nominated. They have much to contribute to our
Thanks for the
politics,
thumbs up, guys.
yet
Thanks for
our
being here.
laws prevent you from speaking your minds and from your own pulpits. An amendment pushed by Lyndon Johnson many years ago threatens religious institutions with a loss of their
I don't have a line that I can call
tax-exempt
from right now. I'm using both
status
my
if
things.
they openly advocate their political views. Their voice has been taken away, Trump said. I am going to work very hard to repeal that language and to protect free speech for all
What's
Americans. We were curious about the issue and whether an amendment, constitutional or otherwise, prevents the practice for religious institutions. So, the restriction is actually a law, not an amendment, and it isn't exclusive to religious institutions. So, Lyndon Johnson says, best known as America's 36th president, the Texan who assumed office when John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. Now, stop right there. We already know things about the Kennedy assassination. And it is quite mysterious that as soon as Kennedy is assassinated and Johnson takes over, this thing goes through. Because this 501c3 thing is devastating. And when you look at it like I'm looking at it in retrospect, like kind of, again, hovering above, looking down at all this stuff that I see that's gone on through history, you can see where it had a profound effect on the news. It took God out of daily life, and it took God out of the basis and the fundamental premise of our country. So it took that element out, and it's never more obvious than when you start going through old newspapers and looking up subject matters like Hivites. You would never see anything like this in a newspaper of today, or a newspaper of the 80s, or a newspaper of the 70s even.
Okay. I found something. Hold on. This is actually pretty damn
A little
interesting.
Bible quote, the Word of God, in every issue.
Shut up.
It says Congress must beware of Hivites.
One second.
Exists
This is actually
in
pretty
stars,
crazy.
and we found something that's simply incredible. We found that the shape of the universe exists inside of the eye. From eclipses of the moon, we found the sun. We found the rainbows. We also found the floating planets above us in the stillness. We found the four muscles of the eye, which are the four pillars of the world.
I'm just not feeling it tonight, man.
The iris below, the pupil, the dark pit, and there's so much more, and I can't wait to show each and every one of you.
Well, I hope it helps.
You see, the secrets of the universe were staring us in the eyes the whole time. And why would we ever doubt that? The creator of our universe, encoding the very secrets of that universe within his own creation. That is the only way he could actually prove without being able to have us interact with him because we've been cut off. It was the only way he could prove to us who he was, by seeing everything around us and comparing it to our own creation, what is inside of us. That is the only way that God could ever prove it in the way that some people need it to be proven to them. Those who don't have faith and those who continue to deny what is right in their eyes will ultimately be cut off. Remember I told you that I believe that we live on top of this lens earth, and that this is the narrow gate back to heaven, the silver cord, the Hyloid Canal. God is amazing. And if in fact we do live on top of the convex lens of the inner eye, then in fact there should be some kind of analogy to an eclipse. And lo and behold, there is. What I want you to do next is I want you to close your right eye. And I want you to stare at the L on your screen. And I want you to move your screen closer or further away from your eye, and you will see the R disappear as you were staring at the L with your left eye and your right eye closed. You just witnessed an eclipse of your eye. Now, why does this happen?
Give this guy a couple minutes. It gets actually pretty
Because
interesting.
there's an area called the optic disc, is where all the nerve fibers come in through the back of your eye. And curiously, blue bloods don't have this blind spot because their nerve fibers enter behind the rods and cones, whereas ours enter in front of the rods and cones. More confirmation. But this is what causes the blind spot. The absence of rods and cones to pick up the image, and your brain can trick your eyes into seeing the images. But lo and behold, you have a blind spot, as we just demonstrated, an eclipse of the eye. So I decided to take this further, and I realized that the disc is exactly what an eclipse is. It is a disc. And when I dug deeper, I was simply blown away, because there is such a thing as a crescent of the optic nerve head, as you're seeing right here. Yes, it is a crescent moon. So now we have what you're looking at here is what seems to be an eclipse in progress. At the base of your eye, where the hyloid canal, the narrow gate, would have entered this exact spot. And there is where you will find the truth. As we've just demonstrated, the road to everlasting life is narrow. The gate is narrow, and few find it.
Proposition 8, another attempt to bring more government bureaucracy into healthcare. 8 imposes new government regulations on every dialysis clinic in California and increasing taxpayer costs by hundreds of millions of dollars. Stop the costly dialysis proposition.
And this is the eclipse of the eye. And the eye Earth model is now nearly complete. All of the naysayers can no longer deny the truth, because the lens of your eye is a prism. The lens of your eye is a prism, not a prison. It is a prism. And when you look at the eye and the lens, when the light comes through, it shines a rainbow prism pattern. We live on the convex lens Earth. This is the rainbow that we see in the sky when standing at 42 degrees. 42 degrees, 42 generations from Abraham to Jesus Christ. And now we know what the rainbow is, because a rainbow can only be viewed at 42 degrees. And here we see the trochlea, which is the little open book. And we see the nerve angle at approximately 42 degrees. The 42 degree angle of light from the lens, pointing us forward within to Jesus Christ, the crossing of the optic nerves on the cross. We finally found the ultimate truth. This is our universe, standing on the convex lens Earth, the stars fixed in the firmament around the inner eye. It's all come together now, you guys. And here we are. And I get to share it with all of you. And one thing is certain. Thousands of years ago, nobody knew what the inside of the body looked like. The inside of your eyes and brain, except for God and the Son of God. So let this be a testament to the true God, the God of our Bible, who describes in detail in Revelation 10, as we are about to cover, exact dimensions of a viewing angle of a rainbow, encoded in the book of Revelation, sealed up until the last days, until this very moment. I saw still another mighty angel coming down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was on his head. His face was like the sun, and his feet like pillars of fire. He had a little book open in his hand. And now we know what the little book is. This is a 42 degree angle that I am placing on top of this image of the trochlea, which is the open book here, and the nerve. This is the angel coming out of the east. And when we place this angle on here, we see the truth. The truth that 42 degrees is in fact the angle of the nerve. Now the scripture goes on. It says here, and he set his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. We see that as well with this muscle here, as it rotates around the entire eye. Part of it is on the sea, the vitreous humor, and part of it is on the land. But this goes on even further, because then cried out with a loud voice as when a lion roars. When he cried out, 7 thunders uttered their voices, and a rainbow has 7 colors. The 7 thunders. And he said, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, seal up the things which the 7 thunders uttered, and do not write them. The angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised up his hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heavens and the things that are in it, the earth, the things that are in it. And you see here, when he raised up his right hand to heaven, this is exactly what we are looking at here. And the sea and the things that are in it, that there should be delay no longer, but in the days of the sounding of the 7th angel, when he is about to sound, the mysteries of God would be finished, as he declared to his servants, the prophets. And they shall tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. So now we know what the angle is. the angle of the angel, the 42 degrees of the rainbow. And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud and a rainbow upon his head. And its face were the sun, and its feet were pillars of fire. And he had in his hand a little open book. And he had set his right foot upon the sea, and his left foot upon the earth. Now these other 4 bands of muscles coming in around the eye are the 4 angels at the 4 corners of the earth, with the 4 winds mentioned in Revelation. But this other angel coming out of the east fits the description of this muscle exactly. The little book is the trochlea. The trochlea, a bone that holds in this muscle here. And the angel which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth lifted up his hand to heaven. Lifted up his hand to heaven, the hand holding the book. And now we begin to understand where we live. Right here.
Oh, fucking froze up on me, huh? Oh, yeah.
The point here is that the subject we are about to discuss is very, very relevant because if the powers that be can make the world believe that the beauty of this earth and the incredible complexity of life on this planet is nothing more than a random accident, that there is no designer, then they can get you to put down your defenses, your spiritual shields, so that you no longer have the eyes to see and the ability to recognize that the spiritual warfare in which they are actively engaged is very real, and it's unfolding all around us at this very moment. Guys, author James Perloff is back. He's returning to SGT Report to discuss his incredible work in the area of evolution. His books, Tornado in a Junkyard and The Case Against Darwin, are a wake-up call for anyone who fully believes Darwin's version of creation. It's my honor to welcome back James Perloff.
Well, it's an honor to be back on the SGT Report.
Well, what did you think of that intro, James? You know my feeling about spiritual warfare. I can see what the elite are up to, and I think that makes our conversation very, very relevant because I believe there is a designer behind the beauty and the creation of this planet. But the elite don't want people to believe that. They want people to just be lulled back to sleep. Don't take a look at the biblical version of creation. Just listen to us. It was all an accident.
That's right. And so we're going to be talking about Darwin's theory today and what's wrong with it. But you're starting off on the right foot, which is why this is relevant, because some of our viewers might think, you know, hey, you guys are just talking about some biological theory. That's not interesting to me. What's this got to do with the SGT report? And so let's talk a little about the relevance first, and then we'll talk about what's wrong with the theory from a science viewpoint. And here's the thing, Sean. If a person is a Christian, or maybe not even a strong Christian, but they have kids and they see that our culture is going pretty crazy. They see
I just thought so. It's so hot tonight.
Unfolding, and they
Still
see
recuperating.
satanic images coming
Yeah,
out
I got
of
your
Hollywood
text. They
movies.
came in.
You were just talking about the Swiss railway ceremony. So they said, well, you know, I want my kids to have a moral foundation. So even though maybe they're not a strong Christian, they bring their kids to church, send them to Sunday school. And what do they learn in church and in the Bible? They learn that God created the heavens and the earth, and that God created all life forms, and that God created man in his image. And that's all in the book of Genesis. However, if your kids are going to public school, they are now hearing something else. They're hearing that God didn't create the heavens and the earth. The Big Bang, an all-natural event, did that. And God didn't create life forms. Life forms simply came about because chemicals randomly
No, it's fine. Like I said, I'm just not feeling so hot tonight.
formed our single-celled ancestors.
I got a lot of recuperating to do.
And man is not created in the image of God. According to the theory of evolution, he's actually created in the image of ape. We just evolved from these ape-like creatures through natural selection and survival of the fittest. Now, if your child is a thinking child, he or she is going to start to ask a question, and they're going to say, you know, I'm hearing two different stories here. Who's right? Is my Bible right, or is my science teacher right? And, you know, a lot of these kids, Sean, they'll say, you know, maybe that stuff I'm hearing in church is just a bunch of hooey. I mean, what does the pastor know? He went to a seminary. They deal with these science guys. They establish things through scientific method. And if evolution has been established to be a scientific truth, it must be true. And these kids, many of them give up on God. In fact, I want to give you a quote. This is from the leading spokesperson for evolution of the 20th century, Julian Huxley, the brother of Aldous. He said this quote, Darwinism removed the whole idea of God as the creator of organisms from the sphere of rational discussion. So, unquote. So, according to Huxley, you're not even rational if you still believe in God after being exposed to Darwin. And I do want to mention, I think this is important to mention, that some people will say, hey, you know, I went to school and I studied evolution. It didn't harm me any. What's the big deal? And I believe in the Bible and evolution. You got a problem with that? And actually, I do have a little bit of a problem with that, because if you look at the account of creation in the Bible of Adam and Eve, it's radically different from Darwin's theory of millions of years and evolving from apes. Now, some people will try to symbolize the Bible and say that Adam and Eve were just symbolic of ape men. But if they're symbolic, where does the Bible stop being symbolic? And the main thing I want to stress is, even though some people say, yeah, what's the big deal? I think they're compatible. A lot of people look at it and see it's clearly a contradiction, and they give up on the idea of God altogether and become atheists or agnostics. And I want to give you some examples of that, but let me pause here. I don't want to.
Yeah, well, no, I agree with you, and I want to just jump in and say that, Charles Darwin lived from 1809 to 1882, James. Do you think science has gotten a little better since then? I want to ask you what's wrong with Darwin's theories. But before I do that, I want to point out to people that science has gotten a whole lot better, guys. CERN is an amazing accomplishment. They hatched the idea in the 50s. It took them this long to get the thing up and running, and it reminds me of the Tower of Babel. I think CERN...
The Sacramento Stand Down is a long-standing organization. We've tried to help veterans who didn't have a place to sleep at night.
They plan to help nearly 300 homeless veterans from the Sacramento and surrounding communities.
But to expect someone to navigate the Veterans Administration process, that's a challenge all onto itself. Dr. Amibera is my first call when veterans need help. He's a giant among the veteran community. I know that he is interested in helping veterans find their way home.
CERN is a modern-day Tower of Babel, and the people behind CERN want to rip open the veil. They want to see God. They want to see the God particle. They want to be gods, essentially. And I think it's very, very dangerous. It's a slippery slope, and the reason I bring it up is because I think it speaks to, as does the Goddard Tunnel ceremony, what they really believe. So whether or not, James, our listeners are spiritual, whether they're atheists, it really doesn't matter, because the elite believe something. I think they believe in a satanic agenda, satanic power, that they're pursuing at a very, very rapid pace, which again is why this conversation is so very relevant. I hope that even the atheists will stick with us here, because I promise you, James is going to take us on a path that is really going to make you think. James, what is wrong with Charles Darwin's theories?
If I can just back up for a moment, I just wanted to exemplify what I was saying before about atheism and agnosticism coming out of Darwin's theory.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to actually give you some examples, just to make it clear how relevant this is and why they wanted this to happen from the theory. I was an atheist at one time, and I was not raised in a religious home. But I didn't have any adversity towards the Bible until the 6th grade, Lexington, Mass, public school, Parker School, elementary school. 6th grade, my teacher, Mr. Horowitz, was teaching us evolution. And I had a little classmate who was a Christian, and she raised her hand and said, well, Mr. Horowitz, that's not what the Bible says. And he looked at the girl with almost pity in his eyes, and he said, well, I'm sorry, dear, but science has proven that the Bible is wrong. And my classmates piped up. They said, yeah, science has proven the Bible is wrong. It's a bunch of malarkey. Didn't you even know that? And Sean, this is a very significant moment in my life, because this is the moment that I said, oh, so the Bible's just an old myth, and God doesn't really exist. God is just, like the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy, it's just an old myth. And I didn't know it, but I was taking the first step towards being an atheist, which I became, and I also became a left-wing hippie. And I don't know if you ever noticed this, Sean, but atheists and agnostics tend to be left-wingers and not conservatives politically. But let me give you 4 quick examples of other people that this happened to, just so people won't think it's just me, okay? There was this Boy Scout who was in the news a few years ago. He was threatened with expulsion from the Boy Scouts because he was an atheist. You're supposed to believe in God in the Boy Scouts, or at least at that time. His name was Darrell Lambert, and I'll give you an exact quote. This is what he told the media. He said, quote, I'm an atheist, I believe in evolution, unquote. And so the same thing that happened to me happened to him. He was taught the theory of evolution, thought that it discredited God. To take a more famous individual, E.O. Wilson, biologist at Harvard University, wrote this, quote, "As were many persons from Alabama, I was a born-again Christian. When I was 15, I entered the Southern Baptist Church with great fervor and interest in the fundamentalist religion. I left at 17 when I got to the University of Alabama and heard about evolutionary theory," unquote. Now, to take it into the geopolitical sphere, we know, well, most of us have heard of Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate. Some people said he was almost as rich as John D. Rockefeller, atheist and founder of the beloved Carnegie Endowment Foundation, right? All right, here's a quote from his autobiography, quote, "When I, along with 3 or 4 of my boon companions, was in this state of doubt about theology, including the supernatural, and indeed the whole scheme of salvation, I came fortunately upon Darwin's works. I remember that light came as in a flood, and all was clear. Not only had..."
You may not realize it, but you are currently funding some dangerous people. They are indoctrinating young minds throughout the West with their resentment-ridden ideology. They have made it their life's mission to undermine Western civilization itself, which they regard as corrupt, oppressive, and patriarchal. If you're a taxpayer or paying for your kid's liberal arts degree, you're underwriting this gang of nihilists. You're supporting ideologues who claim that all truth is subjective, that all sex differences are socially constructed, and that Western imperialism is the sole source of all third world problems. They are the postmodernists, pushing progressive activism at a college near you. They produce the mobs that violently shut down campus speakers, the language police who enshrine into law use of fabricated gender pronouns, and the deans whose livelihoods depend on madly rooting out discrimination where little or none exists. Their thinking took hold in Western universities in the 60s and 70s, when the true believers of the radical left became the professors of today. And now we rack up education-related debt, not so that our children learn to think critically, write clearly, or speak properly, but so they can model their mentor's destructive agenda. It's now possible to complete an English degree and never encounter Shakespeare, one of those dead white males whose works underlie our society of oppression. To understand and oppose the postmodernists, the ideas by which they own themselves must be clearly identified. First is their new unholy trinity of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity is defined not by opinion, but by race, ethnicity, or sexual identity. Equity is no longer the laudable goal of equality of opportunity, but the insistence on equality of outcome. And inclusion is the use of identity-based quotas to attain this misconceived state of equity. All the classic rights of the West are to be considered secondary to these new values. Take, for example, freedom of speech, the very pillar of democracy. The postmodernists refuse to believe that people of goodwill can exchange ideas and reach consensus. Their world is instead a Hobbesian nightmare of identity groups warring for power. They don't see ideas that run contrary to their ideology as simply incorrect. They see them as integral to the oppressive system they wish to supplant, and consider it a moral obligation to stifle and constrain their expression. Second is rejection of the free market, of the very idea that free voluntary trading benefits everyone. They won't acknowledge that capitalism has lifted up hundreds of millions of people, so they can, for the first time in history, afford food, shelter, clothing, transportation, even entertainment and travel. Those classified as poor in the US, and increasingly everywhere else, are able to meet their basic needs. Meanwhile, in once prosperous Venezuela, until recently the poster child of the campus radicals, the middle class lines up for toilet paper. Third and finally are the politics of identity. Postmodernists don't believe in individuals. You're an exemplar of your race, sex, or sexual preference. You're also either a victim or an oppressor. No wrong can be done by anyone in the former group, and no good by the latter. Such ideas of victimization do nothing but justify the use of power and engender intergroup conflict. All these concepts originated with Karl Marx, the 19th century German philosopher. Marx viewed the world as a gigantic class struggle, the bourgeoisie against the proletariat, the grasping rich against the desperate poor. But wherever his ideas were put into practice, in the Soviet Union, China, Vietnam, and Cambodia, to name just a few, Whole economies failed and tens of millions were killed. We fought a decades-long Cold War to stop the spread of those murderous notions. But they're back in the new guise of identity politics. The corrupt ideas of the postmodern neo-Marxists should be consigned to the dustbin of history. Instead, we underwrite their continuance in the very institutions where the central ideas of the West should be transmitted across the generations. Unless we stop, postmodernism will do to America and the entire Western world what it's already done to its universities. I'm Jordan Peterson, Professor of Psychology at the University of Toronto for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video. To help keep PragerU videos free, please consider making a tax-deductible donation.
Hadn't got rid of theology and the supernatural, but I had found the truth of evolution, unquote, Andrew Carnegie. And one more, go from capitalism to communism. We've all heard of Joseph Stalin, mass murderer of millions, dictator of the Soviet Union. I'm going to quote from a book published in Moscow in 1940. It's his biography. It's called Landmarks in the Life of Stalin. Quote, at a very early age, while still a pupil in the ecclesiastical school, religious school, right? Comrade Stalin developed a critical mind and revolutionary sentiments. He began to read Darwin and became an atheist. Ziegler Jitsi, a boyhood friend of Stalin's, relates, I began to speak of God. Joseph heard me out, and after a moment's silence said, you know, they're fooling us. There is no God. I was astonished at these words. I had never heard anything like it before. How can you say such things, so-so? I exclaimed. I'll lend you a book to read. It will show you that the world and all living things are quite different from what you imagine, and all this talk about God is sheer nonsense, Joseph said. What book is that? I inquired. Darwin. You must read it. Joseph impressed on me, unquote, Landmarks in the Life of Stalin. Now we could go on, but I just wanted to make it clear that Darwinism for well over a century has been turning people into agnostics and atheists. And I also want to say one more thing about this, Sean. Why is it, because Darwin was financed, okay, he got financial help. Why is it that the powers that be, the Rothschilds, wanted to introduce this theory and have it impressed upon the public? And you actually touched on this on the beginning. Once you remove God as the creator and replace it with chance processes, which is what Darwin's theory does, you make the Bible an old myth. When you make the Bible an old myth, the Ten Commandments are an old myth. And what do the Ten Commandments teach you? That you shouldn't kill, shouldn't steal, shouldn't lie, right? Good stuff, right?
Yeah.
All right. But the Rothschilds wanted a world in which politicians and newscasters would lie, in which bankers would steal for them, and in which eugenicists and soldiers would kill for them in their population control program, okay? So it was very important for them to have this theory advanced as science and as fact. And, of course, a Darwinist at this point in our conversation, I know what they would say, Sean, because I used to be an evolutionist myself. An evolutionist would say, well, you know what? I don't believe in any of this garbage you guys are saying about the so-called moral implications of Darwinism. But even if I did, so what? Darwin's theory is as well proven as the laws of gravity. It's a science like physics and chemistry, and you know what? If you disagree with it, you're obviously anti-science. You might as well be against physics and chemistry as well.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's really the segue into our next phase, and the main phase is what's wrong with the theory scientifically. We want to show that actually scientifically it's bogus.
Yeah, I want you to dismantle this because I'll play devil's advocate because you're right.
That's what they are.
The naysayers will say, hey, look, on the origin of species, it proves Darwin's theory is absolutely right, and you people are nuts. You people are Bible-believing nuts if you think that it's not true. We know evolution is fact. Darwin proved it. And I just want to say a couple things. Again, getting back to the fact that the man wrote the book in the 1800s, we now know that on the molecular level, they used to believe, this guy believed that the smaller things got, the simpler things got. And the exact opposite is true, James. They've now realized that the smaller they go onto the quantum level, there's evidence of complexity so magnificent that it speaks to a designer, and many atheist scientists have even come out to say just that. So I want to ask you, What is wrong with Darwin's On the Origin of Species that the establishment still bitterly clings to as a piece of faith, just like they cling to the Big Bang, which is nothing more than a theory? What's wrong with On the Origin of Species?
Shine a light on your hero with your nomination for the International ACE Award 2018. For more information, go to aceaward.com.
Well, we're going to present 4 proofs that it's wrong, and I'm going to take 2 proofs that the evolutionists use and show where they're flawed. And I think the best place to start is at the beginning of life. Oh, you know what, Sean? I want you to put a graphic up on the screen because I think it's important we give our audience a 1-minute refresher on what the theory of evolution says.
Can do. What?
So what the theory says is that life began in the ocean billions of years ago when the right chemicals formed our single-celled ancestors by chance. And then these single-celled creatures began to evolve into multicellular creatures, and they became the first sea-going invertebrates. Invertebrates, a creature without a backbone like a jellyfish. Then the invertebrates evolved into fish, and then fish yearned to come ashore, and so their fins started to evolve into legs. And they became the first amphibians, which are creatures, of course, that can go on land or water like a frog. And then amphibians evolved into reptiles evolved into mammals, and then eventually within the class of mammals, you had these ape-like creatures who evolved into man. And that's the theory in a nutshell. It might be taught a little differently from one school of thought to another, but that's it. And that's basically what your kids are taught in school. So to start at the beginning, the origin of life, and Darwin did talk about that, the origin of species, said that life began in a warm little pond, but after a while they realized that a pond wouldn't last long enough for significant evolution to take place, so they changed it to the ocean. So let's see what's wrong with this. Now, I've got a can here of all-natural cola, and if we look at it, it says cola. It says 12 ounces, which it reminds us, in this case, is 354 mLs.
I laughed because you said all-natural cola. I don't think there's anything natural about cola, but go ahead.
Well, it's from Whole Foods. It's as natural as cola can get. Let's put it that way, okay?
Copy.
All right. Now, it says Whole Foods on it. And it's got a list of ingredients, the amount of fat and sodium, and it's got a barcode which is scannable, and it's got a pop top, which works very nicely, and it's got cola inside, very tasty, right? Now, does anybody think that this can and its contents and the printing on the outside could have originated by pure chance? And obviously not. I mean, it's too well designed. So that raises the question of how could a cell come about by chance, because it's astronomically more complex than the can I just showed you. And I want to give you a quote. The quote is this, quote, "A simple one-celled bacterium, or coli, contains DNA information units that are the equivalent of 100 million pages of Encyclopedia Britannica," unquote, and that quote is from the Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, cells have a functional unit called proteins. That's their basic unit. And even in a bacterial cell, there's thousands of different proteins. And not to get technical, but proteins are found out on a smaller building block called amino acids, and there's hundreds in one protein, and they have to be in the right order. And some of your listeners, I'm sure, have heard of Francis Crick. He won the Nobel Prize for co-discovering the structure of DNA. And he calculated what the odds would be of getting a protein by chance, in the ancient ocean. You know what the odds are, according to Francis Crick? The odds are 1 in 10 to the power of 260. And if you want to know how big a number that is, you couldn't fit that many electrons in the known universe. Mathematicians usually say that anything with odds greater than 1 in 10 to the power of 50 is impossible. So it would be impossible to get one protein by chance, let alone the thousands a cell would need. And think about it, a cell would need the ability.
The Sacramento Stand Down is a long-standing organization. We've tried to help veterans who didn't have a place to sleep at night.
They plan to help nearly 300 homeless veterans from the Sacramento and surrounding communities.
But to expect someone to navigate the Veterans Administration process, that's a challenge all unto itself. Dr. Amidura is my first call when veterans need help. He's a giant among the veteran community. I know that he is interested in helping veterans find their way home.
Ability to ingest nutrients, expel waste, and really think about this one. This first cell formed by chance, before it died, in the span of one lifetime, would have had to develop and perfect the process of cellular reproduction, because if it didn't, there never would have been a second cell, and Darwin's evolutionary process would stop right there.
Yeah, I just love that. I also love the metaphor of a tornado in a junkyard. Maybe you could just briefly share that story for people, with people, because I think it's so powerful. And I'd like to mention that my friend Thomas Gailey recently wrote an article that we posted at SGT Report called "The Problems with Evolutionary Theory." You guys can Google that and read Tom's article. I bring it up because the comments section was filled with people who agreed and disagreed. So this is a very, very, again, relevant and important topic, because it's very, very difficult to sway people who are strict Darwinists into our camp, which is the camp that believes that there is a designer and there was a creator from day one. Can you tell people about Tornado in a Junkyard? Just share that story. I just love it.
Well, that's the title of my first book on Darwinism, and I borrowed the imagery from Sir Fred Hoyle, the noted British astronomer. He was asked what he thought the chances were of higher life forms evolving by Darwinian processes, and he said that the odds would be the same as a tornado sweeping through a junkyard and leaving behind a perfectly assembled Boeing 747. And I love that imagery, so I chose it for the title of my book.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and it speaks to the complexity of, quote-unquote, the design. Again, that Coke pan, not nearly as complex as a cell or a strand of DNA, and yet it, too, had a designer. Okay, let's move on. Let's continue to deconstruct Darwin.
All right. I just want to mention, by the way, we're talking about science. Science is based on observations, and there are no observations to support this idea that a cell could come about by chance. I mean, nobody's ever seen chemicals randomly assemble themselves into working functional cellular parts. Okay, but our second of four evidences is genetics, and of course genes dictate what our physical makeup is. Now a zebra can't give birth to a baby kangaroo. Why? Because she hasn't got kangaroo genes. A woman can't even be born with blonde hair unless she's got genes for blonde hair, right? Otherwise she's got to use Lady Claro. Now, Darwin didn't know about genetics. As we're saying, science is advancing. It was not a science in his day, at least when he wrote The Origin of Species. And when Darwinists first heard of genetics, when they learned about it, they first resisted it. And the reason was they realized, we don't have to just explain in our theory how the anatomical features came about by evolution. We now have to explain how the new genes came about, because, if we came from a fish, a fish's gene pool is radically different than a human's gene pool. So where the genes come from? And this originally stumped the Darwinists, but they came up with a solution. And what the solution was, Sean, it was mutations. Random mutations, which are a copying mistake in the genetic code. They occur very rarely, but they do occasionally happen, and they do change genetic information,
well,
right?
Cancer's a mutation, too.
Yeah.
There's a definite downside to some mutations, James.
I'll say. They say that mutations are the building block of evolutionary change. So in other words, hundreds of millions of years ago, some fish got a random mutation that gave a little bit of an arm, right? And this was conferred such a great survival advantage that it spread through those fish. And then, lo and behold, another mutation came along which gave it a little bit more of an arm, until finally the fish, through mutation, developed an arm. Okay, here's the problem with that. Science is advancing, as you said. We now have this book, Not by Chance, Shattering the Modern Theory of Evolution by Dr. Lee Spetner, who is no dweeb. Maybe I didn't hold that up in a way you can really see it. But Dr. Spetner, MIT grad, PhD, taught information science for years at Johns Hopkins University and the Weizmann Institute. And here's what he writes in his book, quote, "In all the reading I've done in life sciences literature, I've never found a mutation that added information. All point mutations that have been studied on the molecular level."
You may not realize it, but you are currently funding some dangerous people. They are indoctrinating young minds throughout the West with their resentment-ridden ideology. They have made it their life's mission to undermine Western civilization itself, which they regard as corrupt, oppressive, and patriarchal. If you're a taxpayer or paying for your kid's liberal arts degree, you're underwriting this gang of nihilists. You're supporting ideologues who claim that all truth is subjective, that all sex differences are socially constructed, and that Western imperialism is the sole source of all third world problems. They are the postmodernists, pushing progressive activism at a college near you. They produce the mobs that violently shut down campus speakers, the language police who enshrine into law use of fabricated gender pronouns, and the deans whose livelihoods depend on madly rooting out discrimination where little or none exists. Their thinking took hold in Western universities in the 60s and 70s, when the true believers of the radical left became the professors of today. And now we rack up education-related debt, not so that our children learn to think critically, write clearly, or speak properly, but so they can model their mentor's destructive agenda. It's now possible to complete an English degree and never encounter Shakespeare, one of those dead white males whose works underlie our society of oppression. To understand and oppose the postmodernists, the ideas by which they orient themselves must be clearly identified. First is their new unholy trinity of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity is defined not by opinion, but by race, ethnicity, or sexual identity. Equity is no longer the laudable goal of equality of opportunity, but the insistence on equality of outcome. And inclusion is the use of identity-based quotas to attain this misconceived state of equity. All the classic rights of the West are to be considered secondary to these new values. Take, for example, freedom of speech, the very pillar of democracy. The postmodernists refuse to believe that people of goodwill can exchange ideas and reach consensus. Their world is instead a Hobbesian nightmare of identity groups warring for power. They don't see ideas that run contrary to their ideology as simply incorrect. They see them as integral to the oppressive system they wish to supplant, and consider it a moral obligation to stifle and constrain their expression. Second is rejection of the free market, of the very idea that free voluntary trading benefits everyone. They won't acknowledge that capitalism has lifted up hundreds of millions of people, so they can, for the first time in history, afford food, shelter, clothing, transportation, even entertainment and travel. Those classified as poor in the US, and increasingly everywhere else, are able to meet their basic needs. Meanwhile, in once prosperous Venezuela, until recently the poster child of the campus radicals, the middle class lines up for toilet paper. Third and finally are the politics of identity. Postmodernists don't believe in individuals. You're an exemplar of your race, sex, or sexual preference. You're also either a victim or an oppressor. No wrong can be done by anyone in the former group, and no good by the latter. Such ideas of victimization do nothing but justify the use of power and engender intergroup conflict. All these concepts originated with Karl Marx, the 19th century German philosopher. Marx viewed the world as a gigantic class struggle, the bourgeoisie against the proletariat, the grasping rich against the desperate poor. But wherever his ideas were put into practice, in the Soviet Union, China, Vietnam, and Cambodia, to name just a few, whole economies failed and tens of millions were killed. We fought a decades-long Cold War to stop the spread of those murderous notions, but they're back in the new guise of identity politics. The corrupt ideas of the postmodern neo-Marxists should be consigned to the dustbin of history. Instead, we underwrite their continuance in the very institutions where the central ideas of the West should be transmitted across the generations. Unless we stop, postmodernism will do to America and the entire Western world what it's already done to its universities. I'm Jordan Peterson, professor of psychology at the University of Toronto, for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video. To help keep PragerU videos free, please consider making a tax-deductible donation.
Turn out to reduce the genetic information and not increase it, unquote. So what he's saying here is mutations. I'm sorry.
They're destructive. Mutations can be destructive.
They are almost universally destructive. They always destroy function. They never add it. They always reduce information, never increase it. Now, just again, science is based on observation. So what do we observe?
Oh, sorry, guys.
To give you sickle cell anemia, cystic fibrosis, Down syndrome, hemophilia, and about 4,000 other genetic diseases. They never improve us. Yet they're supposed to be the building blocks of evolutionary improvement, right? And now, I want you to put another graphic up on the screen for our viewers, because evolutionists will object at this point and say that there are such things as beneficial mutations. And what I want you to put up is the one called sickle cell anemia. Now, I've been on radio and had an evolutionist call up and say, sickle cell anemia, this is a common argument, by the way, sickle cell anemia is a wonderful example of how mutations create evolution. Now, why do they say this? What's the benefit of sickle cell anemia? Because it's a disease. Well, the benefit is that people with sickle cell do not get malaria. And so the argument is that mutations have redesigned, reconstructed the red blood cells so we don't get malaria. Okay, so let's look at the picture, and we see a normal red blood cell, and below that a sickle cell. Now, the sickle cell is deformed, it is misshapen. The function of red blood cells is to transport oxygen. It's lost function. It does not transport oxygen as well as a normal cell. It clogs your arteries. It causes intense pain. And I used to work with sickle cell victims back in the 70s. And back then, before medical advances, it was common for people to die in their 20s from this disease. Nobody hopes that their child will get sickle cell anemia because it prevents malaria. Now, it's true that the parasites that cause malaria don't like to go into these deformed cells, but that's just like you wouldn't want to move into a house that was all dilapidated, you know? It has lost function. It has lost information. You know what, Sean? If I cut off my legs, I won't get athlete's foot. It'll prevent a disease, right? So that's the benefit, right? But it's not evolution. All mutations will delete information and function. They don't add to it. That's Dr. Spetner's point, and that is our proof number 2. It's a theory of evolution.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about all this. So many of us know this information. To others, it's new. And that's because of the public schools, because of the indoctrination, the Darwinist indoctrination. And as we talk about this, James, you know what vision comes to mind? Frankenstein science is what Darwin's theory of evolution is. It's Frankenstein science. And you can't have the beauty we see in nature happen by accident or by chance mutation. If it happened by chance mutation, we wouldn't see beautiful tropical birds and beautiful tropical fish. We would see monstrous results, in my opinion. Now, I want to ask you about the historical record. This comes from my friend Thomas. Is there any evidence in the fossil record to support evolution? I've never seen it. And, let's talk about the missing link. Is there any fossil record that supports these jumps between species?
Great question. So what you should really do is I want to ask you to put the picture called evolution sequence back on the screen. And we see these organisms, right? We see this microorganisms, invertebrates, fish, to amphibians, to reptiles, to mammals. That's a sequence that Darwin proposed and which is still taught in public schools today. All right. So if we look at these pictures, Sean, there are tens of thousands of species that fit into these categories: germs, invertebrates, fish, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. But how many species are there that are intermediate? 0. Not one. Nada. But there should be many. Darwin said the number would be inconceivably great. In fact, I'm going to ask you to put another picture up, which is a microcosm of this picture. It's called fish to amphibian. Now, to think about it, for a fish to become a walking land creature, it wouldn't have to just evolve new bones. It would have to evolve new muscles to support those bones and new nerves to control the movements of the limbs. And while it was coming on shore, it would have to evolve a whole new breathing system. Now, according to evolutionists themselves, this happened by chance mutations. So, as you can imagine, in the red arrow area here, the in-between phase, there would have to be millions of creatures living and dying. And as I said, Darwin himself said the number would be inconceivably great. So where are they? Why is it that we have no overlaps? The founder of taxonomy, Carolus Linnaeus, he's the guy who started calling creatures by genus, species. He invented those terms, right? He was against evolution because he saw there were no overlaps. So how did Darwinists explain this? Here's how they explain it. All the intermediate transitional forms became extinct.
That's good.
Okay. Well, that's like saying that my dog ate my homework. Yeah. The translation of they all became extinct is we ain't got no proof. Just as the no proof for a cell coming out by chance. If you can put on the screen one more time, this is the last time I'll ask for it, that evolution sequence from microorganism to human. This is what Darwin is saying. We started out as basically a bacterium, a single-celled creature who evolved into a human. But did you know, Sean, science is based on observation, right? Did you know by actual observation, we've never seen one species of bacteria evolve into another species of bacteria? This is a quote from Alan H. Linton, Professor Emeritus of Bacteriology at the University of Bristol in England. Quote, throughout 150 years of the science of bacteriology, there is no evidence that one species of bacteria is changed into another. Unquote. How do you like them apples? We're supposed to believe bacteria became people, but by actual observation, no species of bacteria has even changed to another species of bacteria.
Yeah,
So talk about your
bacteria became human beings, right? This precious, beautiful design. They also happen to become wolves, and they also happen to become fish, and they also happen to become apes, and they also happen to become. It's absolutely absurd, but so often I'll hear people whose intellect I respect. Joe Rogan has a very popular podcast, and Joe Rogan consistently will talk about evolution, and he will cite wolves and dogs. He'll say, all the dog breeds came from wolves. There's your example of evolution. I'm tired of hearing people talk about creation. What's wrong with that thesis? It's far too simple in my opinion, James, because it only speaks to intra-species evolution, which I think has been documented, but it does not speak to one species becoming another species. Where's Joe Rogan got it wrong when he talks about dog breeds?
We're going to get to that, but I want to back up and handle your question on fossils first. Can we do that?
Good, you bet. I'm too excited, man. I'll slow down.
Okay.
Let's back up.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get to that. The fossils, because, okay, since there are no transitional or in-between forms in the living world, the evolutionists will say it's in the fossil record, and you had asked about that. Let's just touch on that. In my books, I have quotes from evolutionists.
Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. These poetic lines, engraved on a bronze plaque beneath the Statue of Liberty, speak to who we are, a nation of immigrants. Until now. As Senate Democrat Chuck Schumer lamented, tears are running down the cheeks of the Statue of Liberty. We've turned our backs on those huddled masses, closed our borders, separated families, hardened our hearts. Or so you would think if you only read the headlines or watch TV news. Just one problem. It's not true. The United States still maintains the most generous immigration policies in the world. Generous to a fault, because the overwhelming numbers have stymied our ability to assimilate the huddled masses. 50 million residents of America are foreign-born. In fact, today the United States has more immigrants as a percentage of its total population than at any time since 1890. That's why, to give one illustration, 176 different languages are spoken among students in the New York City school system. How did we get here? For starters, America grants permanent residence to 1 million people every single year. And that's just the tip of the iceberg because of something you've probably heard referred to as chain migration. Chain migration allows immigrants to sponsor not only their immediate family, parents, spouses, and children under age 21, but much of their extended family once they gain citizenship. Unmarried adult children and any children they might have. Married adult children and their children. And brothers and sisters and their children. Princeton University researchers, using the most recently available data, found that immigrants sponsored an average of 3.45 additional relatives each. So the 1 million immigrants granted permanent residence each year potentially adds over time another 3.5 million. In addition, an estimated 100,000 refugees and asylum seekers, people who claim to be fleeing political or personal strife abroad, enter the country annually. From 2008 to 2017, the U.S. gave green cards to well over 1 million people for humanitarian reasons, allowing them to live and work here permanently. After 5 years, they can apply for full citizenship. We're not done yet. In that same time frame, nearly 500,000 more people came to America through the Diversity Visa Lottery, a program designed to admit more people from underrepresented countries into the U.S. Diversity visa applicants don't need a high school education, job skills, or pretty much anything.
And thanks again to Chain Migration. Spouses and unmarried children under 21 of visa lottery winners also get to come to America. This nonstop flow of new legal immigrants, based on family ties instead of skills, abilities, and allegiance to American values, has of course been supplemented by millions who enter the country illegally and stay illegally. Dominant media outlets use the euphemism undocumented, but the official U.S. government term used in federal statutes is illegal alien, an unlawful entrant who came without permission and stays in open defiance of our laws. The number of illegal aliens in the country is usually given as 11 million. But have you noticed that number never seems to change? Common sense suggests it's higher, much higher. And though illegal aliens themselves don't qualify for welfare, they receive free health care in our clinics and hospitals. And through their American-born children, they can expect to receive all manner of benefits, cash aid, food stamps, and housing vouchers. Their children are entitled to a free education in public schools. Building a high-tech border barrier would certainly help stem this flow. Ending chain migration is another obvious remedy. E-Verify, the national database that allows employers to check workers' immigration status, is also essential. So is a fully functioning entry-exit system to track visa overstayers. But all solutions will ultimately fail unless we get control of the numbers and enforce our laws consistently. It's Sovereignty 101. This is our home, and we have not only the right, but the responsibility to determine who comes in, how many come in, and what qualities and qualifications they bring. The truth is, we let in millions, and of course, millions more want to come. Who can blame them? But it's simply not possible or desirable to let in everyone. And it's not hateful to say so. It's not hateful to protect our borders. It's not hateful to protect our citizens. It's not hateful to protect our values. Lady Liberty may be shedding tears, not because we've stopped welcoming immigrants, but because our ill-conceived immigration policies are threatening the American dream. I'm Michelle Malkin, CRTV host and author of Invasion and Sold Out for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video. To help keep PragerU videos free, please consider making a tax-deductible donation.
Themselves that there are no transitional forms between any of these major groups, but we haven't got time for that, so I'm going to give you one coverall quote. And this is from Colin Patterson, senior paleontologist at the British Museum of Natural History. In fact, he was the director of the British Museum. Quote, "The American Museum people are hard to contradict when they say there are no transitional fossils. As a paleontologist myself, I am much occupied with the philosophical problems of identifying ancestral forms in the fossil record. I will lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil for which one could make a watertight argument," unquote, Colin Patterson. By the way, you'll find the quotes and citations in my books. Let's take a couple examples of, because you will see, evolution will argue against this, of course, because every once in a while you will see a spectacular headline saying a missing link's been found. Let's take two examples of missing links, okay, that have been discredited. Put the picture up of Piltdown Man.
Right.
Now,
complete fraud.
Here we have the Piltdown Man surrounded by scientists. The guy in the white suit is Sir Arthur Keith, noted anatomist. And looking over his shoulder is Sir Grafton Elliott Smith, and you have these other Darwinists. By the way, the reason they're called Sir is because they were knighted for their work on the Piltdown Man.
They serve the Queen. They serve the Queen.
They're still doing it, right? Still serving the different queens.
Many people do.
Anyway, what was the Piltdown Man? The Piltdown Man was an alleged ape man found in a gravel pit not too far from Darwin's home. And it consisted of a jawbone and a skull. And when the find was announced in 1912, you know what the headline was in the New York Times? It was "Darwin Theory Proved True." Oh, you can always rely on good old mainstream media, you know.
Hearst, that was probably a Hearst publication. Hearst himself wrote that one.
He would have. I think the New York Times beat him to the punch. He was over on the New York Journal, right? But anyway, okay, so this alleged ape man, which they said was 500 million years old, was on display at the British Museum for for about 40 years before it's discovered to be a fake. What it actually was not 500 million years old. The lower jawbone was a modern orangutan jaw. Somebody simply filed down the teeth to make them more human looking and stained it to make it look old. And they put it together in the pit with a human skull, which they also stained to make it look old. And it fooled all these guys at the British Museum, although, who knows, maybe one or two were even involved with the fraud, who knows. But some people would say, okay, well, that was a clever forgery. You know, anyone could be fooled by a forgery, but no one could be fooled by a real fossil. So let's take an example of how you can be fooled by a real fossil. So I'd like you to put on the screen the image of called coelacanth fossil. And what we're looking at is the coelacanth was a fish found in Jurassic Rock, the age of the dinosaurs. And for years, evolutionists said it had been extinct for tens of millions of years. And they said it was a transition between fish and amphibians. So if you look at this fossil, it looks like it's walking, right? They said this is a walking fish. Look, it's got little legs there. Here's the problem. In 1938, somebody caught a live coelacanth off the coast of Madagascar. And since then, hundreds more have been caught. And if you could put the image now on the screen of live coelacanth, examination of the coelacanth proved it was 100% fish. No amphibian characteristics. Now, why is it so easy to be fooled by a fossil? Because 99% of the biology of any creature is in its soft anatomy, which you cannot access on a fossil, and that makes it very easy to fill in the other 99%, fill in besides the 1% you can see with your imagination. And that's fossils. You'll see an occasional spectacular one announced, but there should be an inconceivably great number of these fossils if the theory is true, and of course we don't see those. All right, the fourth area of evidence that I'd like to address today comes from Dr. Michael Behe, who's a biochemist at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. He's written this book, Darwin's Black Box, The Biochemical Challenge to Evolution. And in this book, he talks about something called irreducible complexity. Now, what he means by that is that in the human body and other creatures, there are certain systems that are very complex and that consist of interdependent parts. You take away one or two parts, the whole system won't work. Ergo, they cannot have evolved. Now, that sounds abstract, so let's take a practical example that he gives. If we get a cut and we bleed, the body stops that with a blood clot. Now, blood clot might look simple to the naked eye, but it's actually a very complex process. Sean, if you could put up on the screen what I called blood clotting cascade. It's well over a dozen steps to make a blood clot, and a person with hemophilia, which is a disease caused by mutation, is missing factor 8, which I've circled there, and they're at high risk for bleeding. Now, if you were missing 2 or 3 factors in the blood clotting process, no chance for survival, you'll bleed to death. So here's the question Dr. Behe asked. How could evolution have produced this? Because in the Darwinian model, blood clotting would have evolved over eons as random mutations introduced each step of the process, but that doesn't work. 3 steps won't do you any good. 6 won't do you any good, or 9. If you've only got 9 steps of the blood clotting process, you'll bleed to death. And if you bleed to death, you can't pass on the incremental stages to the next generation. And so the point that Dr. Behe makes is that this whole system had to be in place from the very beginning, which would indicate an intelligent design. Now he goes on, he shows the same thing with human vision. You know, what came first? Was it the retina, the optic nerve? They've all got to be there. Same thing with the immune system. What came first? Antibodies, white blood cells, they all have to be working together. So Dr. B is not a Bible thumper, but his point is that there are systems which evolution cannot explain. That's our fourth and last evidence against evolution. But if we have time, I'd like to take 2 evidences, including Joe Rogan's, that evolutionists use, and look at the flaws in them.
Oh yeah, please do. Let's talk about Rogan's thesis that all dog breeds that we see have come from the wolf, so it's a proof of evolution. But that's just an intra-species example. Where does Rogan have it wrong?
Just what you said, okay. If your kids go to public school, the teacher will say something like this. They'll say, kids, how can those crazy intelligent design people say there's no evolution? There's a gazillion examples of evolution around us, and they'll use dog breeding as an example, the various breeds of dog. They'll say plant breeders develop new breeds of corn, and racehorse owners develop faster racehorse owners. So they'll say, look, if you get a little bit of change over a little bit of time, you can get unlimited change over unlimited time, and thus the theory of evolution is true. So let's see where this is wrong, let's see where it's flawed. Let's take dog breeds, and if you could put the quick picture up that I gave you called dog breeds, it's true that there are a lot of different dog breeds, but dog breeders didn't put new genes to these dogs. God endowed dogs with a rich gene pool. The fact of the matter is that dogs are all part of a single species. And so what we want to stress here is that variation within a type, and that would include the wolf, okay, because wolves, coyotes, and dogs can all interbreed. Variation within a type is not the same thing as evolution, which is changing one kind of animal to another, changing a fish to an amphibian to a reptile to a mammal. Totally different. Now, to make this a little clearer, if you could put up the graphic called human race, we take a look at the great variety among human beings, everything from African pygmies to Japanese sumo wrestlers, right? There's over 7 billion people on Earth, and no two are exactly alike. And why is that? Because God gave us a rich gene pool, and that is a very intelligent design for man, because it's that rich gene pool that gives us our individual identity. You know, Sean, if you and I had the exact same genes, we couldn't be told apart. We'd sound alike, we'd look alike. But even though nobody looks exactly like you, Sean, and probably nobody ever has, that doesn't mean you represent a new phase in evolution. It just means you're a variation within humanity, totally different from evolution. Now, can racehorse owners develop
Years ago, I interviewed Kwesi Mfume, then the president of the NAACP. As between the presence of white racism and the absence of black fathers, I asked him, which poses the bigger threat to the black community? Without missing a beat, he said, the absence of black fathers. It was President Barack Obama who said, we all know these statistics, that children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. The Journal of Research on Adolescence confirms that even after controlling for varying levels of household income, kids in father-absent homes are more likely to end up in jail, and kids who never had a father in the house are the most likely to wind up behind bars. In 1960, 5% of America's children entered the world without a mother and father married to each other. By 1980, it was 18%. By 2000, it had risen to 33%, and 15 years later, the number reached 41%. For blacks, even during slavery, when marriage for slaves was illegal, black children were more likely than today to be raised by both their mother and father. Economist Walter Williams has written that, according to census data from 1890 to 1940, a black child was more likely to grow up with married parents than a white child. For blacks, out-of-wedlock births have gone from 25% in 1965 to 73% in 2015. For whites, from less than 5% to over 25%, and for Hispanics, out-of-wedlock births have risen to 53%. What happened to fathers? The answer is found in a basic law of economics. If you subsidize undesirable behavior, you will get more undesirable behavior. In 1949, the nation's poverty rate was 34%. By 1965, it was cut in half to 17%, all before President Lyndon Johnson's so-called War on Poverty. But after that war began in 1965, poverty began to flatline. From 1965 until now, the government has spent over $20 trillion to fight poverty. The poverty rate has remained unchanged, but the relationship between poor men and women has changed dramatically. That's because our generous welfare system allows women, in effect, to marry the government. And this makes it all too easy for men to abandon their traditional moral and financial responsibilities. Psychologists call such dependency learned helplessness. How do we know that the welfare state creates disincentives that hurt the very people we're trying to help? They tell us. In 1985, the Los Angeles Times asked both the poor and the non-poor whether poor women often have children to get additional benefits. Most of the non-poor respondents said no. However, 64% of poor respondents said yes. Now, who do you think is in a better position to know? Tupac Shakur the late rapper, once said, "I know for a fact that had I had a father, I'd have some discipline, I'd have more confidence." He admitted he began running with gangs because he wanted the things a father gives to a child, especially to a boy: structure and protection. "Your mother cannot calm you down the way a man can," Shakur said. "You need a man to teach you how to be a man." In my book, Dear Father, Dear Son, I write about my rough, tough World War II Marine Staff Sergeant dad. Born in the Jim Crow South of Athens, Georgia, he was 14 at the start of the Great Depression. Growing up, I watched my father work 2 full-time jobs as a janitor. He also cooked for a rich family on the weekends and somehow managed to go to night school to get his GED. When I was 10, my father opened a small restaurant that he ran until he retired in his mid-80s. He was never angry or bitter and insisted that today's America was very different from the world of racial segregation and limited opportunity in which he grew up. "Hard work wins," he told me and my brothers. "You get out of life what you put into it. You can't control the outcome, but you are 100% in control of the effort. And before blaming other people, go to the nearest mirror and ask yourself, what could I have done to change the outcome?" This advice shaped my life. Fathers matter. Until we have a government policy that makes that its first priority, nothing will change. I'm Larry Elder for Prager University.
To subscribe to our YouTube channel, click here. To help keep our videos free, donate here.
Fast racehorses, faster racehorses. Yeah, if you take a fast female horse and mate it with a fast male, you might get a fast offspring, maybe it'll win the Kentucky Derby, but there's a limit to the change you'll get. That horse is not going to go 1,000 miles an hour, and you're not going to be able to change it into an elephant. So as people within the creation intelligent design community, we acknowledge, yeah, there is change, but there's a limit to that change. And by the way, if people think that DNA could have come out by chance, let me just quote Bill Gates. He said, quote, "DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software we've ever created," unquote. So if you don't think the codes for Windows 7 could come about by chance, neither could the codes for the genetic code.
Yeah, and as we wrap this up, I just want to say again, take a look at the science coming out of CERN. Take a look at what they're doing over at CERN. It's really not being reported upon by the Mockingbird mainstream media. The development of CERN took place really largely in secret. What they're doing really is largely a secret. And if you take a look at the advances in science, molecular biology, sending rockets into space, real hardcore science. This conversation, James, leaves me thinking that Darwin's version of science has about as much science in it as Scientology. So tell me what's wrong with Darwin's version of science.
Okay. Just to wrap up here, again, Darwinists will commonly say that the theory of evolution is a science like the laws of gravity. It's like physics and chemistry. And so let's just look at that. Physics, there you go, the laws of gravity, right? Chemistry, in chemistry, there's a law that water will boil at 100 degrees centigrade, and that can be tested over and over again. Now, suppose I had a theory that water can boil at 73 degrees centigrade. It'd be easy to disprove my hypothesis. All you got to do is warm water up to 73 degrees, it won't boil. But let's compare that to the claims of evolution. Charles Darwin said, you know why we have so little body hair? It's because our ape ancestors preferred mates with less hair. Now, how do you disprove that? How do you test something that only exists as an idea in the brain of Charles Darwin? To take one other example, there's a paleontologist, Donald Johanson, who found some bones in Africa, which he called Lucy. And he said that Lucy is our ancestor, and he based this on the fact that he believed some of the bones indicated that Lucy may have walked upright. Now, how do you prove that Lucy is not our ancestor? You really can't. You see, physics and chemistry consist of things that you can test right now in present time in a laboratory. Darwinism consists of speculations about things that Darwinists think happened millions of years ago, and there's no way you can test things that happened millions of years ago with the same authority as you can test the present.
Well, I'll tell you what, James. You and I probably are not going to be able to convince any hardcore atheists who believe they have science on their side to come over to our camp. But I just want to leave people with this. Again, we started with commenting on spiritual warfare, at least I did. It's alive and well on planet Earth, folks, and the people that control the paradigm, the Rothschild bankers, the Vatican, the people at the very tippy top of the pyramid that James mentioned earlier in the interview, these people don't want you to know what they're up to. They don't really want you to know their spiritual agenda, which is to worship a beast system, which they are now ushering in at a very rapid pace. Again, look at the Goddard Tunnel opening ceremony on June 1st. It cost more than $8 million, and it tells the narrative of what they believe, who they worship, and what they want to do to humanity. It's time to wake up. It's time to recognize that spiritual warfare on planet Earth is alive and well. And if you believe Darwin's strict theory of evolution, you're believing what the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, and the controllers want you to believe. I can't thank you enough for your time, James. This was a gripping conversation. And you know, last time we had you on, I think we put one of your books up on Amazon's top sellers list. Let's tell people about your books. Let's support James, guys. You can get a copy of Tornado in a Junkyard and or The Case Against Darwin from James Perloff's site, jamesperloff.com, or head directly to Amazon. James, anything else we can do to support you?
No, I should just mention these books are older. They were published in 99 and 02, but the principles are pretty timeless. And of course, you don't have to go to read one of my books to get the facts on evolution. If you go to my website, jamesperloff.com, I've got a links page, and near the top, there's some links to creation and intelligent design sites where you can get this information for free. By the way, just to explain the difference between the two books, The Case Against Darwin is very short. You read it in a couple of hours. The Tornado in a Junkyard book is intensive. It's over 300 pages long, almost 700 footnotes, and it goes into things that we don't have time to in a show like today's, like dinosaurs and the Scopes trials and things of that nature. Very, very complex and detailed.
All right, well, very good. Guys, get the book, support James' work. Let's get him back up on the Amazon bestseller list. That was fun to hear. Yeah, that was a lot of fun to do, and a lot of, we've got great listeners, as you know, James. We have very supportive listeners, wonderful people. James, it's really been my great honor to have you on again. Our last interview, we talked about Truth is a Lonely Warrior and the Shadows of Power. Guys, that'll give you the big picture about the Rothschild banking dynasty and the other banking families that want to enslave humanity. Our guest has been James Perloff. Check him out at jamesperloff.com. And once again, James, thanks so much.
Thank you, Sean. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure is all mine. And guys, if you stuck with us through this lengthy interview, thank you. I hope you got something out of it, and perhaps you'll share it with your friends, family, and colleagues. I think it's an important conversation to have. We live in turbulent times. We're trying to keep our finger pointed directly at the enemies of humanity. Thanks so much for your support at sgtreport.com and thelibertymill.com. Real news 24/7. May God bless you and your family, and have a terrific week ahead. We really love you guys. Hang in there. Thanks for listening.
Before we get started, we're going to have Kaya Shivers, who actually is the founder of Our Republic, who is responsible for this event. Clap for her. I would like to thank everybody for coming. It is an honor. This is actually our first live event and live panel. Our Republic, I just very briefly want to tell you about Our Republic. Our Republic was started a year ago. I wanted to have a media news site that I could go to every day and read and believe, engage, and like. So as you all know, the media landscape has gotten quite toxic and sludgy. I wanted to have a place where folk that look like me, grew up in neighborhoods that I grew up in, could get information to navigate this world. And that's how Our Republic started. We actually started covering the hurricanes last August, and I wanted to always return to hurricanes because my mother being from the Louisiana area and me going to New Orleans frequently, I know that there still is a significant part of the city that has not been developed since 2005. I thought it was very important that we explore this because natural disasters could happen to anybody and everybody. And so what I did is that I wanted to have, Our Republic is not only just journalists, but they also are people who are professionals who want to tell a story, as well as curators of events. And it's a collective of us that feel it is necessary to do what I call call storytelling. My parents are from the South, so I grew up on some really great stories that had meaning, message, and depth. And I wanted to bring that to Ark Republic, as well as just folk from the African diaspora or people who come from lineages that tell stories. So that's how Ark Republic started. The Hurricane Trifecta 1 year later explores what happens throughout the regions of the Caribbean, the South, the Southern United States, specifically Texas and Louisiana, as well as places in Central America that were affected. Puerto Rico particularly represents all the things, in my opinion, that go wrong in the United States, or that are wrong. This is a region of the country that was stolen. Well, I mean, that's not the only region, but forced into citizenship and a quasi-citizenship. And before the hurricane hits, it's a vulnerable country economically already and politically. And then when a natural disaster and devastation happens, not given the proper federal aid, and then treated as if people are not human too. I think it's important that we explore Puerto Rico because this can happen to anybody. It actually has happened to anybody and everybody. I'm from South Central Los Angeles. When the riots hit, there are places in where I grew up that never thrived. And that was 1992 when I was in high school. And I remember the tanks and the National Guards and the people who were being oppressed being treated like criminals. So when the Hurricane Trifecta, when I began to reach out, I wanted to also get veteran journalists and people I knew who could tell a story. I reached out to Lisa Durden. And Lisa Durden, unlike some other folk who, if you see this, know who you are, yes. We ain't gonna name names today, but we not gonna name names, but said yes. What do I need to do? And within an hour, had the panel and the idea put together and carried it out meticulously. I am grateful and I am honored to know you, sister, and I appreciate you. And so here we are, the panel discussion. I'm not going to say much about it. I want Lisa to tell you how the journey was for her and also introduce the panelists. I will just be the person who will be pouring your wine and refilling your glasses or your plates. Okay, I do respect folk and what they bring, and I think that it's important that we share platforms and we share dollars. With that being said, Ark Republic is a membership-based company, and the motto is membership is gangster, so you can be a member as well. That right now, guys. Membership is gangster. I come from a line of people who fought to be in unions, who fought to be included, and so I think that when we come together and organize, like the folk on the panel, we are strong. And before I go, and I usually do this at the end, but I want to do this in the beginning to just show you how grateful I am. I wanted to, because I told you my folk from the South, we hospitable, right? Oh. So I wanted to thank you, Lisa. Oh. Goodies. You should have. I'm not front. I like it. Yes. Shall I? I'll pass these around. Mug is my favorite thing. I'll give it to that one. Mug. I like that. Yes. I like it. Open it up right there. That's right. Mug. And so the mugs that I'm giving, the mugs that I'm giving, the panelists have a story. It's from the National Memorial of Justice and Peace in Montgomery, Alabama. I have the opportunity, they call it the Lynching Museum. My husband and I, who's back there, thank you, I want to recognize him because he if it wasn't for him, no wine would be possible tonight. Okay? So thank you. The Lynching Museum is on a site where at one point in the world's history had the most enslaved African people. And I had the opportunity to go see it. I traveled through the East and the South this summer, and let me tell you, this is Trump territory. Don't get it twisted that we live in these cities. We are living in a bubble. There are a lot of people that support this agenda unbeknownst to us. We have a lot of work to do. I wanted to give you something from this memorial site is because it represents how easily governments can use bodies for money and do not care about the humanity. And I think this is what's going on in Puerto Rico. Kaya wants to definitely speak about someone who's here. I would like to once again acknowledge Mayor Smith for coming from Irvington. Yes, you didn't have to be here, but you came, and that says a lot, and I appreciate that immensely, and I hope we can continue to build. Secondly, I want to say that Ark Republic came out of my pocket. Yes. It is self-funded. Yes. I have been running on hopes and dreams, dimes, and credit cards for the Because let me tell you, in terms of black women being funded, we make up 0.05% of the companies that people invest in. So please, if you're going to invest in somebody, invest in a black woman right now. But I do have to recognize City National Bank, which is the local bank that did actually work with me, and I have to publicly acknowledge a young woman by the name of Somali Wright. And she's not here, but I just wanted to say, thank you, girl. You know what you did. And then these gentlemen were not here when I started, but what Arc Republic did do was launch an internship and an apprenticeship, because a lot of students were coming to us because they were not afforded opportunities to develop their craft as a journalist. And I knew that all too well, that there were very little spaces for myself to do that. And now in this dwindling media landscape, it is even harder. So I want to publicly recognize two young men who are apprentices, junior reporters for Arc Republic, who are actually, one is a recent Rutgers grad, and one is a current Rutgers student in his last year. And I want to thank Express Newark for the spaces of third space. I have to say this. Very nice. But I also have to but I also, as a professor, Dr. Shivers, this is Dr. Shivers talking. Okay, this is not Kaya from the block. Okay. I can do that. Okay. But as a professor who has worked many years at Rutgers Newark, and as a professor who has reached out to my Rutgers faculty in journalism and video production media, we need to invest in the people that we teach. We cannot teach them in the class and then send them out to fend for themselves, especially these brown and black students that need a lot of support. They need a lot of guidance, and they need a lot of help. So I would like to publicly acknowledge the two young brothers that stood, because I could get cray-cray. And about 6 of the articles you see in the Hurricane Trifecta come from them. Matthew Gamble, please stand up. All right. Matthew Gamble and Pedro Guarin Camargo, please stand up. I would like to say thank you very much. I just wanted to say, Wayne Smith has known me for 1,000 years, so he knows that's my tagline. Yeah, I have to trademark that. Don't try to steal it. So I just want to thank the audience. Good evening for coming, and we are going to have a lively debate and conversation. So my style as a moderator is not like questions to the panel, then the audience. So I'm going to have some set questions to get the dialogue started. But if something is just burning in the middle of it, and you want to just kind of raise your hand, or we can kind of break into a non-traditional way of having the Q&A. But there'll be an official Q&A after we do it in 40 minutes or so. So I wanted to throw my glasses on, because I wear glasses to read, and to introduce the panel, and then I'm going to have them tell a little bit more about themselves. When I got the call from Kaya to do this, and she said, this is a trifecta program, so you can do any of those hurricanes that you feel like you have something to say. So as a journalist, I feel like people of color have been treated poorly, especially in those kinds of disasters. Much like when the levees broke, you know what happened to African Americans in the Ninth Ward and those kinds of areas in New Orleans. So I said, okay, I'll take them into Puerto Rico. It's kind of fresh. It's almost a year later, and I think it's something that we need to really stay on top of, because people kind of like, the news happens, and then all of a sudden nobody talks about it anymore. That's a problem. So I decided to figure out who was I going to invite on the panel. So I wanted to have as many Latinas and Latinos on the panel that I could, because I figured, a lot of people outside of the culture love to talk about other people's culture. Like black folks know, people love to talk about us, don't they? Other folks are the experts on black folks. So I didn't want to be that person that felt I could say something about your community that I don't know a whole lot about. So you know more than I do about that. So I'm here just kind of as a journalist. And my background is, and people saying, people see me on TV and they think, Lisa, this is a fun girl. I actually have a degree in journalism. I went to Seton Hall University. And unfortunately, I didn't have a career in journalism because I wasn't kind of a straight girl like Sue Simmons. I'm kind of a playful girl. So
social media breathed new life into my career because I get to be, you know, the kind of person that can put my opinion in now. You know, the Roger Grimsby days, you couldn't get your opinion in there. So it worked for me well. So that's kind of how I came to do this. But I'm still a research person. I still take these kinds of conversations very, very seriously, and I do respect this dialogue. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the esteemed panel, which I love. So to my right, we have Lydia Valencia. She's the CEO of the New Jersey Puerto Rico Congress. Thank you for coming. And to her right, we have Maisel Valentin Esquire. She is a lawyer, but she also manages the Puerto Rico Hurricane Relief Fund. And then my friend, who got referred to by Marilyn Colon, she's Evelyn Mejil. Am I saying it correctly? Mejil. See, I don't even have the, I took 4 years of Spanish. I'm terrible. I did get a B though. She's the chair and organizer of the Unity March for Puerto Rico. And Alvin Suarez. Now, I've been knowing Alvin for about a year. Alvin Suarez is a drummer of the all-blind band called Los Ciegos del Barrio, which is all blind boys in the hood. And I wanted to bring someone on from the disabled community because we forgot about those individuals, especially people who are blind, because technology is their eyes. And when you have no electricity forever, how does a blind person get the messages? How do they function? Because they have no computer. They can't recharge their laptop and their devices. So I felt he was a good voice for this panel. Plus, I think they did like a fundraiser for, you know, Puerto Rico. So that works out very well. Dave? Where's Dave? Oh, that line shouldn't be there. It should just be full screen. And then, last but not least, Khadija Taylor. Now, Khadija Taylor and I go back a long way. As friends in journalism and filmmakers, she's the CEO of Newark Speaks to You. So clap for the panel. And if anybody wants to see me on, you know, in my little journalism thing, I'm on every Friday night, tomorrow night, on Channel 9 at 11 on Chasing News. We literally chase the news. And we sit there and we actually commentate about what we think about the news. And Wayne Smith has been on there many times with me. So let's get started. So I wanted to go deeper into a little bit about yourselves and your background. How did you begin to have these organizations and feel that you needed to do something about not just the hurricane, but just the community in general? So we'll start with you, Lydia.
Okay, as Lisa indicated, I'm the CEO, president of the New Jersey Puerto Rican Congress, and it's a statewide organization in the state of New Jersey that has existed since 1971. During the last maybe 15 years, Hispanics have been kind of clubbed together as a Hispanic community, and our Puerto Rican community got lost in the whole scheme of things and our needs. Not that the issues were not important, they were important, but issues were really coming to a head, and we needed to start to address them directly. So the New Jersey Puerto Rican Congress said, okay, it's time, and we used to celebrate a convention for many years. And we had stopped because they kind of became like a party. And parties are fine, but they're costly sometimes, and sometimes the work is more important than the party. So what we did was we kind of held back on the conventions, and 2 years ago we started to talk about, you know, there's a large exodus of Puerto Ricans leaving the island towards the mainland, given the fiscal problems of the island. That being said, then we started planning our convention again, and it was slated to be, and it was, on September the 30th of 2017. 5 or 7 days later after the hurricane. Wow. Notwithstanding, and it was an event by invitation only, we wanted the stakeholders and the leadership of our Puerto Rican community to be in the room to discuss our issues and how we should start addressing them. Well, Hurricane Maria became the major issue, as many of our folks that were there had no indications as to how their families were faring. So that is where we became involved in all of the issue of Hurricane Maria, not forgetting also the fiscal problem of the island as well.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening.
Like Lisa mentioned, I'm an attorney. I was born and raised in Newark, but I moved to Puerto Rico when I was 12. So my experience with hurricanes is very personal. While I lived there, off the top of my head, I can remember hurricanes Hortense, Lewis, Marilyn, and then Georges, which was a really big one. That was almost exactly 20 years from Hurricane Maria. Actually, I think it was pretty dead on 20 years. And I remember what happened during Georges, and it was nowhere near Maria. I was one of the people who was standing online for half a day under the hot sun just to get one bag of ice so you could take it home for your cooler. So when the hurricane happened, there was a group of people in the community. I have to give a really big shout out to Ramon Ruiz Rodriguez. He took it upon himself to call every Puerto Rican that he knew in the community of Newark that worked in any way, shape, or form with helping others. And he called a meeting. Our first meeting was September 19th. So I remember leaving that meeting and calling my mother, telling her, I just left the meeting. We're going to start working hard. We know a lot of things are going to happen. Hopefully I'll talk to you tomorrow. I didn't speak to my mother until the day of the Congress. I will never forget that. I'm in the middle of the Congress, and all of a sudden my phone rings, and I see it's 787. And like a lot of us, as soon as you see that number, it still affects me today. So out of that effort was born the Hurricane Maria Relief Fund under the Little League, La Liga Roberto Clemente, honoring his legacy of disaster relief. And for several months, we worked under that title. That's how we collected everything. The 501c3 was in place. As an attorney, I stepped up. I wanted to make sure that the money went where it needed to go and that we dotted our I's and crossed our T's. As of right now, that's all been rolled over, and we created Diaspora in Action, DIA. And our role now going forward is to try and prepare plans to reach out to the towns and the nonprofit sector. So if this ever does happen again, we're ready. We cannot wait for the government to figure out what they're doing to start helping. I just got back from Puerto Rico. I was there in August. I met with one of my contacts in Utuado, who I had never met, because the way we worked is I just started getting phone numbers of people that I knew, and I asked them if they knew other people, calling all the phone numbers, most of which didn't work until you finally got someone. Usually you'd get a number from somebody who was working like at a FEMA center, because they were good for that. At the FEMA centers, there was Wi-Fi. So I just started calling a whole bunch of strangers and letting them know we have 250,000 pounds of materials that just got delivered to Puerto Rico today. We want to take it out into the community. Do you have anyone that can come and get the materials? Because we didn't want to hand it over to the government. In fact, we had someone who at Customs begged the people that traveled from here out of their own pocket, traveled to Puerto Rico, begged them not to hand it over to the government. As of today, they've found something like 12 45-foot containers that were released to FEMA that were abandoned. So there's a lot of issues that came up we're going to discuss today, but that's pretty much where we're at. We tried to alleviate the best we could from the nonprofit sector, and going forward, we want to establish those relationships to make sure if the government doesn't know what it's doing, we certainly will.
Thank you. That's amazing. Amazing.
My name is Evelyn Mahill, and I am the founder and CEO of Project Hope 360. It's a humanitarian outreach for peace and empowerment. Prior to that, I was the CEO of Senator Littman's Advocacy Center. There we used to work with, and still do, special victims and victims of human trafficking, etc. So my entire career has been always around humanitarian issues and social justice. A year ago, like everybody else, I found myself extremely frustrated on an emotional level and on every level about what was happening in Puerto Rico. And I think, like a lot of people, I felt, helpless and hopeless and just angry and sad and emotional and all of these different things that eventually lead us to action, and sometimes, it can paralyze us, but sometimes it will mobilize us if we just put the right spirit behind it. And I was seeing everything that was happening in Puerto Rico, And I had just gotten back from a 2-year tour. I did a humanitarian tour to 23 countries doing humanitarian work. And I had just gotten back from India, and I was planning to take, just a time for rest when Hurricane Maria happened. And I remember I was in Florida, I was in Miami, and I was seeing this on TV, and I just probably like everybody else, I was just crying, and I couldn't understand why this was happening and how it was happening, and spending almost 20 years working with government. I was one of the first civilians to enter during Hurricane Katrina, and we were, the first of response members when Hurricane Katrina happened. So I have firsthand experience as to what the neglect of the government can look like in the hearts and in the eyes of those that are suffering the most when something like this happens. And then I just felt like, you know what, I can sit here and I can cry, or I can do something. And the idea was to be able to unite a people, to say that we stand with the people of Puerto Rico. And so I started and I organized and chaired the Unity March for Puerto Rico in Washington, D.C., which basically organized about 23 different states that showed up to say, presente, we're here with the people of Puerto Rico. And just like, a lot of my panelists here, I spent time living in Puerto Rico as a child, and it's I have some split time. So it was very, very personal for me, but it wasn't just because I was Puerto Rican. It was because it was a humanitarian crisis. And that was first and foremost. Because I think that too many people make this just a Puerto Rican issue, and this is an everybody issue. So when we have this conversation, we need to have this conversation knowing that we are talking about our brothers and our sisters. We are not talking in us and them terms. We, the people. So that is how I hope that we can have this conversation, because we're not a divided people. Not unless we allow that. Yes.
Hi, my name is Khadija.
No, fuck, whatever.